Hello, thank you for joining us for the board meeting tonight. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. When you joined, you heard as an audience member that you're in listen only mode. You cannot unmute yourself. However, I am now able to unmute you to speak for public comment. So if you'd like to speak during public comment, please use the raise your hand function to indicate to me that you'd like to speak, and I will unmute you to do so. The raise your hand function is shown by a hand icon on your screen. Please know your webcam will still remain off. Your comment will be audio only. So now I'm going to turn things over to President Coyne to begin the meeting.
Great, thank you. And I call to order this regular meeting. Sorry, am I muted or anything? Can you hear me? Okay.
Dirk, we could hear you.
Okay. I call to order this regular meeting of the Park Ridge Park District Board of Park Commissioners. Today is Tuesday, November 5th, 2020. Happy birthday, Dad. And it is 6:02 p.m. Please call the roll.
Commissioner Grau?
Here.
Commissioner Harrington?
Here.
Commissioner LeDuc?
Here.
Commissioner Leach? Commissioner O'Donnell?
Here.
Commissioner Tunnell?
Here.
Commissioner Coyne?
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody like to amend, add, or delete an item to the current agenda? Hearing no comments on it, we'll move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Is there anybody out there in the internet land that has anything to add to our meeting today?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. Then I'm going to turn it over to our attorney, Dirk Price, to take it for his report.
Good evening, everyone. My report this evening concerns the procurement and purchase of property. We were able to successfully negotiate a contract for the procurement of 531 Forest View Avenue. You had previously authorized Gail and myself to with a window for negotiation purposes. Things moved quickly as we anticipated with the seller and the seller's attorney. We were able to get the contract together, which you have. We executed it so that we could move along on the purchase and sale in accordance with the seller's desires. And recognizing that as a matter of due diligence for the public, we had to do a phase 1 environmental survey. That's also required by our risk management company, Perderma. And we also did some due diligence about the facility itself and its usefulness for us. And Superintendent Wolf was very helpful on that. And so before you now is the contract which has been executed in accordance with the authority we were given, but it has to be approved in an open session. And so we've drafted the motion because it's also going to ratify the action we've taken to do that. The good news is that the phase 1 revealed no environmental issues whatsoever. There were a number of things, just given the age of the property, that the home inspection revealed. The most important of which was the masonry needed to be tuck pointed or checked at least for a couple of spots, we think. And we got a $1,000 credit from the seller for that purpose. Recognizing that the rest of it is going to be of use. We're going to have it as is for a while until we have a better handle on our budget, when we're able to really predict what the world's going to be like more than a week ahead of it ourselves. So all in all, I think we're in a really good position. And with your approval, the motion approving the contract and ratifying the action signing it, we are then ready to move forward to closing here this month.
Great, thank you. Sorry about that. My mic was muted. Do we want, should I make, first of all, I'm supposed to make the motion, but do we want conversation on it after the motion, or do we want to talk now? After the motion.
After the motion.
Okay. So I move to approve resolution number 20-5, a resolution approving a real estate contract to purchase 531 Forest View Avenue in Park Ridge, Illinois, and ratifying the actions of the executive director and corporate counsel in executing the agreement. This action will be formally ratified in an actual board meeting with physical presence at a later date. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second. Discussion. Commissioner Harrington.
Thanks. I'm just resorting to screen management too. So we haven't spoken publicly of this, so I just wanted to, kind of publicly state it's a unique time to be contemplating land acquisition, but I think it shows this board's commitment to really strategic open space acquisition at a property that is adjacent to one of our largest, most used parks. And, I think for me, I am very supportive of this purchase because of the future potential for additional revenues and programming as well.
Thank you. Any other comments? I'll add my own comment that I just agree with Commissioner Harrington 100%. Ordinarily, I am not personally, I feel that we have to be very cautious when we take a piece of private property off of the tax rolls for our purposes. This is, I don't know if it could have found a more perfect candidate for me to change my philosophy on that. It's adjacent to our park. The price was pretty reasonable, I think. It's not a crazy high expense for the park district, and it's filling in our most popular park. I think it's our most popular park, or one of, and so I'm really happy about this, and I think we did the right thing by acting quickly on it. I'm sorry. Executive Director Marquez.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, the other benefit, the staff and, has shared with the board kind of a land priority that we have. And we completed, it's probably been 3 or 4 years at least now, of just areas in town that we think, would be beneficial for the district for the long term. And I will just say that this was, on the staff perspective, number one on our priority, due to the reasons that were stated about the proximity, being right next to the nature center, very heavily used nature center property across street from Main Park. So we're very excited about the potential. We don't have yet exact, as Dirk said, we want to get the property and secure the property at this point. And then we'll have the conversations next about, in the future, what we can do and what, the different concepts could be for that property. But for now, it was about securing the land. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Any other last comments? No, then I think we call for a vote. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Grau,
Yes.
Commissioner Harrington,
Yes.
Commissioner Leduc,
Yes.
Commissioner Leach, Commissioner O'Donnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell,
Yes.
Commissioner Coyne.
Aye. All right, motion carried. Thank you all. I think it was just a great acquisition, and thank you to Gail and staff for all their hard work on it. So,
And Dirk.
and well, Dirk.
Yeah, and Dirk.
And Dirk. Okay. Next on the agenda is the Executive Director report.
I'm going to be brief this evening, as the
Yay.
main portion of our meeting is the budget. But really, that's what I've been working on, is budget. So That's been the focus. I attended a legal IAPD legal symposium, a virtual legal symposium today. It was the first time they've done the legal symposium virtually. I think it went very well. Some great information, very COVID focused, as you can imagine. And then the other thing is that, and I know I've reported the board on this, that we got new direction last week from the governor, and it affected the Park District in terms of group size, which is now reduced from 50 to 25, and then mainly some more restrictions and designating in the risk categories certain sports. Hockey was in there, and basketball. Basketball was the one that we will have to change our program, unfortunately, because they do not allow scrimmages in this phase, but the staff is working through it and communicating with the several hundred participants that we already have signed up. So we're working through that. So that's all I really have tonight, other than, if you have any other questions at this point.
Hearing no questions, thank you, Executive Director Mountcastle. And I now turn the floor over to our Finance Commissioner, Finance Liaison Commissioner Harrington, to basically run the rest of the meeting.
Here we go. The annual start of our budget meetings. All right, so let's launch into it. We've got Bob Lewis here, who we're happy to have joining us virtually. Bob, do you want to start with the bond financing presentation?
Sure, just a second. I had that pulled up here. Can everybody see it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks good.
Okay, now let me make it full screen, just make it a little bigger. Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight and share this update on your bond portfolio. Just a second, the full screen just shot up, covered up my presentation.
Should we get off our cameras, Bob? Would that help?
No, there should be a hide mode. It was that way at the beginning. There, I just had to click off. That's what it was. Okay. So I was saying thank you for the opportunity to present this tonight, just give you an overview of your debt portfolio and some of the opportunities that are coming up. I know this discussion will segue into the capital plan, which I know Sandra has more to discuss on that tonight. So let me go ahead and start by just looking at the summary of the district's outstanding principal by bond series. And you have 5 bond series that are outstanding. 3 of them are callable. So bonds are, very similar to what we have as individuals with our home mortgages and car payments. It's debt that is owed, but it's owed by the Park District. One difference between bonds and those types of debt obligations are bonds cannot be paid off at any time, unlike our home mortgage. You have to wait until you get to the call date to refinance those obligations. There is some ways to do things in advance of the call date, but at this time, it seems like it's more prudent to wait to get closer to the call date to refinance those. So as you see, the 13A and 13C bonds are callable about 1 year from now. The IRS rules state you can refinance those when you get within 90 days of the call date and do it on a tax exempt basis. If you try to do it more than 90 days, then they can't be sold tax exempt. At the bottom of each column, I highlight what the interest rate range is. So you're between 3.5% to 4%, which is considerably above where we find the market right now. I'll talk a little bit more about the market a little later in the presentation. The next callable series is the 14Bs. They're just not a very good viable refunding candidate for a couple reasons. One, that the call date is 1 year later than the 13 bonds. And you don't have as many payments that are callable, and there are not as many callable after the call date. You'll notice that there's only 4 payments afterwards, whereas with these other bond series, there's several more payments. So there's a lot more opportunity to save money by refinancing it. So a little bit more about the 13A bonds, in case you're curious what they were originally used for. Those were non-referendum bonds. They're payable from your debt service extension base. I'll talk a little bit more about that a little later in the presentation. They were used to fund capital improvements, including the Centennial Pool renovation. You have about $3.5 million that's callable. The average rate is 3.74%. And as I mentioned earlier, you can do a current refunding around September of 2021. The 13C bonds were issued pursuant to referendum. And they're one of the series that financed the acquisition of the piece of property known as the youth campus, as I'm sure you're very familiar with. There's about $6 million of those bonds that will be callable on December 1st of 21. Its rate is just below 4%, and the timing to refinance them is approximately the same time, or at the same time as the 13A series. So what are some refunding restrictions and limitations? I already alluded to the first one about the restrictions that the IRS has. In order to sell them tax exempt, you got to be within 90 days of the call date. In case you're wondering, taxable interest rates are anywhere from 0.5% to 0.75% higher than tax exempt interest rates. I should remind everybody, what does it mean when I keep saying tax exempt? It means that the interest you pay your investors, those investors don't have to pay taxes on those interest payments. So consequently, they're willing to buy them at a lower interest rate. Essentially, you're getting an implicit subsidy from the federal government. So we like to take advantage of that whenever we can. The third item that has made doing things more in advance of the call date is that your investment rates are so low now with what the Fed has done with short-term rates. And again, the Fed announced today they're going to maintain short-term rates at their current levels. So you can't really earn a lot on those funds until the call date if you were to advance or fund them. So here's a little snapshot of the market. And this is called the MMD Index. This is a market basket of AAA rated bonds. My data set here I'm showing you graphically goes back almost 20 years. So the lines represent 4 different points on the yield curve, the 1, the 5, the 10, and the 20. Just gives you an idea of where short-term rates have been, medium-term rates, and long-term rates. And also we show in the background the gray areas, the federal funds rate, which has a major impact on short-term rates, as you can see how closely the 1-year rate, muni rate, follows the Fed funds rate. The other rates take their cues from it, but there's a lot of other factors that impact medium and long-term rates. And now I want to draw your attention to the right-hand side, just so I can highlight how low interest rates are from a historical perspective. And they are near all-time lows currently, if you go all the way across this chart. The next slide, just to give you a little more detail of what's been happening since the beginning of the year, I've taken that same index and blown it up into just the data since the beginning of the year, so you can see more of the activity that's been taking place. I like to just point out what happened here in March. A lot of people are always curious, well, what happened in the muni market when COVID first became part of our everyday lifestyle? And you can see how much rates shot up in a little over a week. They went up over 2% because, like everything else, everything had so much uncertainty. Muni bonds saw their interest rates increase like they've never increased before in that shorter period of time. Fortunately, stability returned fairly quickly as Congress took action to pass a couple different stimulus bills, and the Federal Reserve implemented several different programs, all of which helped to bring back confidence and stability to the markets, to the point where now you've seen for several months now, the muni market has been fairly stable. You saw it hit all-time lows here in August. We've come up from those lows. Now, I don't reflect in this chart what we've seen the last couple of days. Muni rates have come down maybe 10 to 15 basis points across the board. I think a lot of people's worst fears, in spite of the fact that we still don't know who our next president's going to be, a lot of the worst fears about the uncertainty of the election so far have not played out. So you've seen rates come back down. Plus, with the prospect of looking like we're still going to have a divided Congress, that means gridlock, probably not as much borrowing it would if it was entirely all Democratic government in Congress and the White House. So some of that has unwound the expectation to be a lot more federal borrowing, and that's the other reason we've seen rates come down since the election. The point being, and going all this market analysis, is it's a very good time to consider borrowing and refinancing debt. And while it's always nice to try to lock in rates ahead of time, I don't think you're going to see a whole lot of rate move over next year. Federal Reserve has indicated they're not going to increase rates for the foreseeable future. The economy will probably continue to improve, but at a slower pace. I think the only thing that might jeopardize and cause these rates to go up faster if we saw inflation rears ugly head, which nobody at this point really expects to happen. So what does this mean for you as a refunding opportunity? Now we look at the 13A bonds, and what we're showing right here, what we estimate savings to be at the current market as of October 14th. So you'd actually probably be a little better today than what we're showing here. The total cash flow savings about estimated at $365,000. The present value of that, because it's over time, is about $350,000. We always measure the effectiveness of our funding by taking this number and divide it by the principal amount, just so you can calculate and see what the savings are on a relative basis, because $348,000 is a nice chunk of savings for a $3.4 million refunding amount. It's not all that great if we were talking about $100 million refunding. So that's why we divide it by the principal amount to get sort of a relative number to compare. A couple of highlights I want to point out here is for every 25 basis point movement, which is 1/4%, your savings changes by $40,000. So this gives you some sensitivity and how much that would fluctuate. Now, because this bond issue is payable from the debt service extension base, refunding of this financing actually just creates more borrowing capacity for you the next time you do a non-referendum borrowing, which it will enhance the amount of proceeds that are available for capital projects. The 13C bonds are a more robust savings opportunity, and it's because the interest rate is slightly higher, but you also have several more years of principal payments after the call date when you compare it to this financing. So more years to save, slightly higher interest rate, you get $1,250,000 is yes. Present value is over $1,100,000, almost 19% PV savings. So on a relative basis, it's almost twice as valuable as the prior refunding. Now this one, for every 25 basis point market movement, savings will fluctuate about $140,000. And this one, because it's a referendum bond, this just reduces the amount of property taxes that your taxpayers would have to pay. On average, in these initial years, it's about, for your median home, it's about $5 per year. In these outer years, it's a little higher, you might get up to $7 or $8. So, although it's a really robust savings opportunity in the aggregate, by the time it trickles down to your taxpayers, it allows them to get another cup of coffee that year, I suppose. But it's still, good policy and practice to refinance it and try to lower the interest rate, in spite of the impact on individual taxpayers may not be that noticeable. So let's just do an overview of capital funding needs. Your debt service extension base, we've talked about this, every other year now when I come out to talk about your biannual borrowing that you've been doing to fund capital projects on a 2-year basis, or a portion of your capital projects on a 2-year basis. Those non-referendum bonds, we've talked about this DSIB, then with the payments on those non-referendum bonds have to fit within this constraint. And this constraint is increases annually by whatever CPI is. So you'll see that's why there's some positive slope here to the lines, because we know that CPI for levy year 20 is 2.3%. The dashed line represents what it could be if it were 1.5% over time. Whenever we do a borrowing, we always assume the current DSIB for those 2 years, just to be a little more conservative, and it leaves that growth in the DSIB available for future financings. So the deadline to impact this levy year 21 is March 1st of 2022. So, you have time before you'd have to issue some non-referendum bonds, and we're going to talk we'll have a scenario here in a moment. But what's nice is you think about your call dates on your 2 bonds that we just went over. Those call dates are December 1st of 21, which means you could close on a financing as early as early September of 21, which means you could do this new money piece at the same time. So you try to be more efficient and accomplish all 3 borrowings at one time. the referendum refunding, the non-referendum refunding, and this new money piece if the board decides to pursue it. Now, so this is a constraint that we focus on a lot when I come out to the meetings, because it's a constraint on what your annual payment can be on your non-referendum bonds. But there's another constraint we haven't focused on as much because we're only doing your borrowings in 2-year increments. But we also have, park districts have to be concerned about their legal debt margin when you're considering the potential for larger financings. And there's 2 calculations when it comes to your legal debt margin. There's one on your overall debt service on all your bonds, referendum or non-referendum. That's 2.875% of your EAV. So we take your EAV of 1.84 billion, multiply it by 2.875%, you get 52.9 million. You can think of that as like a credit card limit. And at any one time, you're going to be using some of your credit card limit. Right now, at the year, it's around 14.2 million at the end of the period, 16 million at the beginning of the period. So right now, you have 16 million because you don't make these payments until December 1st. But shortly, you'll be down to 14. So when you subtract the 14 million, you get 38,645,000. But there's a separate limit for your non-referendum general obligation bonds of 0.575%. So that comes into play when you're looking at doing borrowings that use some of your debt service extension base that go beyond and just doing a 2-year borrowing. We have to be conscious of how much principal you can generate at any one time on a non-referendum borrowing. So at the beginning of this fiscal year, it was 4.5 million. And after you make some of these non-referendum payments, it will increase to 5.7 million. And you can see over time that number continues to grow as you're paying down principal. Now, the other thing that causes this number to change is growth in your EAV or perhaps reductions in your EAV depending on what we see over the next couple of years. Coming out of the last recession, we saw EAV go down. I think to go down quite this much this time around, but you could see some dips in your EAV. And if you did, that would cut into these numbers just a bit that you see here in this last row. So here we put together some proposed bonds and the refunding of the non-referendum bonds. That was the 13As. Just to give you an idea of what it would look like. I think Sandra's going to talk about some of your potential capital needs later on. So this was set up to show how some of your capital needs might be funded over time and then how those bonds might be amortized. So assuming you just stayed on the track of doing a 2-year borrowing next year, that's reflected right here. This would generate about 1.6 million, which would be spent over a 2-year period. And then it was contemplated in the capital budget. You may do a borrowing in 2023. We estimate you get proceeds then of about 4.66 million. Now, all these not only fit within the DSEB, but they fit within your non-referendum margin, and not margin, but debt limit I talked about on this slide. And then around 2027, it was contemplated you do another non-referendum bond that would generate proceeds of about 4.6 million. And I think I may have misspoke. This light blue generated proceeds of 5.4 million. Now we're a bit conservative in this analysis for 2 reasons. Is we use current market rates plus 0.5%. I mean, it seems conservative now. By the time you get to issuing bonds in 27, who knows? Maybe they will be higher than that. But the other thing that we've done to be conservative is we've structured these bonds assuming a constant debt service extension base by this solid line, where in actuality, by the time if you were to issue 27 bonds as being reflected here, your DSEB would probably be up to this level, which would provide you more flexibility to amortize those bonds. And this is just meant to be a concept plan, because what you'd want to factor into here is whether you need to do other borrowings, perhaps over the term of the capital budget. But what's nice is all these bonds aren't being issued at once, so you're not making all these decisions at once. When it comes time to sell, for instance, the light blue bars, these could be structured a little differently to give flexibility for perhaps a borrowing that you might need to do in 2025 that maybe you're not planning for now. So just want to make that sure that everybody's clear on that this is just a concept plan at this point, showing you how it might be accomplished. Many decisions will be made at different points in time, ultimately as to how the bonds will be amortized if the board chose to proceed. And the last thing I want to point out on this slide is the impact of the refunding. The gray area in the back represents your current non-referendum debt service. The blue bars represent what your non-referendum debt service is post-refunding. So you'll notice how these dark blue lines are below the gray area. So that gap between the gray area and the dark blue lines represents the estimated $40,000 to $45,000 savings. So if you remember when I covered the savings, I talked about the fact that you would get more borrowing capacity as a result of that refunding. So that's reflected by the difference between the blue column and the gray area graph. So what are the potential next steps? Again, this is just meant to give the board some idea of when decisions might have to be made. Is if the target is to refinance the 13A and 13C bonds and close in September 21, which is the first window of opportunity to do that on a tax exempt basis, you would sell those bonds in August of 21. And you would approve ordinances in August of 21 to sell the refunding bonds and also do the 2-year bond. So if you're inclined to do another 2-year bond, if that's what fits into the capital plan, what we contemplate is that you do that at the same time as the refunding, which means you'd hold a hearing in July and you publish for that hearing also in July. So it's a little sooner than you've done recently. Normally, if it wasn't for the refundings, you wouldn't have begun this process until probably December of 21, and then sold those new bonds in January, February of 22, and closed before March of 22. Again, we're just contemplating that you do this at the same time as the refunding, so you'd only have to go through the process of selling bonds once. And then I have this solid line here just as a demarcation to show you, when the next decisions would have to be made. If the board is inclined to do the projects that are shown in the capital budget, the next time you need to make those determinations by either late 22 or early 23, and then you would sell those 23 bonds somewhere in the middle of 2023. It's also when you'd hold the binding hearing. So we probably wouldn't be talking about bonds again for another couple years solidly after you would do this refunding before you would have to consider how you might amortize and structure a new bond issue. So that's the sum of my presentation. I can go ahead and take some questions now if you like.
Thanks, Bob. And I know we're going to be talking through, some of the proposed bond scenarios as it applies to the proposed budget before us tonight. But does anyone have any technical bond questions? You've got a great expert before you right now.
I have a question. On the this is Commissioner O'Donnell. With the on these refinancings to take advantage of these lower interest rates, would they be for the same term for each one of those chunks of bonds? Is that what it would be? So in other words, if you're refinancing
Yeah, that's a very good question. So let me go back to slide 9, if you guys can see that. Yeah, they would be maintaining the same term. So if you look on slide 9, the original debt service that's being refinanced, this is the principal and interest in this column, was scheduled to mature in December of 28. The estimated new debt service reflected here, which is repeated in this column right here as well, is matching the same term, December 1st of 28. So you'd have even savings reduction in each year. And that's the same thing on this one as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I normally do that, forgot to do that. Any other questions?
I guess from a novice perspective, this is Commissioner Grau. I mean, it looks fabulous, but why wouldn't you do this? I mean, the only risk is that the rates would be higher, right? And you wouldn't do it.
Yeah, I mean,
and then you wouldn't do it. I mean, we're not pulling the trigger now. We're basing our budget on this, but we will decide closer to the date to do it.
That's correct. Yeah, I would anticipate there'd be an update probably somewhere around May or so to let you know where they stand now in terms of estimated savings. And then after that shortly after that is when you would start taking action on those items. But yeah, there's really there's no downside per se in refinancing the bonds. It's more or less an opportunity cost of, could you do better waiting longer? And once you get to your call date, every day you go by the call date, you continue to pay interest at the higher interest rate. So when you get close to the call date, most issuers choose to proceed at that point. It doesn't mean rates won't be lower afterwards. It's just like every time we sell a stock in our portfolio or some sort of investment, you can almost guarantee you're going to later on like, oh, I should have held on to that a little longer.
And how many call dates are there? Is it just one?
It's continuously callable. So once you get to that day, it's always callable at any day thereafter.
So it's kind of a coincidence that these both were callable about the same time?
Well, they were sold in the same year. So when we sold those bonds originally, we established the call date to be in the same year because they were going out a similar term. Plus, it's more efficient because then you're doing bonds at one time instead of two different times.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So Commissioner O'Donnell, one more time. I think I understand this actually, but I want to make sure. So big picture, I can see Commissioner Coyne's laughing at me. I understand. I think you're presenting us with three things really. So one of which seems to be a no-brainer, that these things are coming up for call and the interest rates are substantially less, so you're going to want to do this unless something dramatic happens between now and sometime next year. Is that correct? That's one.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
And then next year we would be making a decision like we normally do on these 1 to 2 year financings that we've been doing on the requirements that we have for our capital planning. So that would still be in place. That's really not impacted by this. Is that correct?
That's correct. The only thing that's impactive is, a timing element, is whether you want to do them at separate times or at the same time.
Right. So then bigger picture, I think what you're saying is this is going to give us an opportunity to borrow more money, which I hate to even think about that, but it does give us an opportunity, and I think you're suggesting that we would, at that time, as that capacity became available, we would balance that against what we were forecasting or what we were planning on capital spending, any projects that might come up, things that we've been waiting to do, things that pop up, to borrow additional funds. So it's a third thing. We don't have to worry about it for now, but in a couple of years, it's something that we would do based on some longer term planning. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, I'm just showing you how that would work given the plans that the administration's put together, but ultimately the board has to decide to do those plans. So if you didn't do them, then you wouldn't need to do the borrowing.
Right. Okay. All right, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Any
Thanks,
other
Bob.
questions? All right, thanks so much, Bob. We appreciate your counsel.
Yeah, I'm probably going to stick on and listen to the discussion if that's okay.
Of course.
You are welcome
More
to
the merrier.
stay.
Okay. I'll just hide here in the
I know-
background then.
Super, thank you. I know Executive Director Mountcastle, perhaps you can give us kind of a broad-based sweep of what we're about to embark upon.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. Thank you very much, Commissioner Harrington. Yes, tonight is the start of our, of course, the staff has been working on this budget probably since Sandra, at least, since we stopped the last one, right? The 2020 budget. But the first time the board is being presented with the budget. And so Superintendent DeAngelis will go through the schedule, but tonight we're going to discuss capital, employee compensation, and the tax levy are the three main topics for tonight. And before I turn it over, I just wanted to make sure that I specifically thank Superintendent DeAngelis for leading our team through this process that has been, of course, more challenging, like everything else, due to our current situation with COVID and the effects on the district. Also wanted to thank the other superintendents and their teams, Superintendent Wolf, who you'll be hearing a lot from tonight, Superintendent Armour, and also Human Resource Director DeGangi and Manager Howler. So everybody's been working very hard. I know Terry will also introduce one of his staff tonight. It's been truly a team effort. As I stated in my letter with the budget we sent out today, and which is public, this has truly been the most challenging budget that the district, at least since I've been here, has had to work through. So the budget is the estimates, and we'll talk a lot about that, and the fact that there's changing factors continuously with COVID. You'll see that throughout the budget presentation that, you know, these are estimates and we will fluctuate with those changing challenges. So the good news is that when we get down to the operating budget the first week of December, you'll see that our year-end estimate is, is negative, but much more positive than what we were projecting with our COVID projections. As I've said many times, this is due to the expense control and also the creativity of the staff, really building a new business model continuously throughout this. So it is still a negative, which we're not used to seeing. So I asked the staff to bring us a balanced budget, and they have done that. But there are several different things you'll see that we had to do to get to that point. We are showing a slight surplus at the end of the year. But really, it's a break-even budget. And what I really wanted to say before we get into the capital is, you may ask, and we've talked about this, why are we expending these dollars on capital when we are in this financial situation? It's hard for, people that, don't have the knowledge of the complexities of the way our dollars need to be spent, but our capital dollars need to be spent on capital. They cannot be transferred to our operating fund for purchases. So we still need to maintain our assets. And so the goal this year was to work on repair and replacement projects. That was the focus. And then also work on the things that we have matching dollars for in terms of grants and different funding sources. For the most part, that is what you will see presented in the capital tonight. I will repeat this again. It just gratifies me so much to see what the Park District means to the public in this time of very difficult time for residents and for all of us, what our parks have meant to everybody. They've always been important, but it's been accentuated through this time. So that's our focus, is the outdoor amenities with this, and taking a hard look at what we can do to help, benefit the residents, who are a lot of them working at home and at home a lot more and not traveling and not going to offices. So we're so proud, and I thank the board, for also your support as we work through this long process. So with that, I will turn it over at this time to Superintendent DeAngelis.
Thank you, Executive Director Mountcastle. So I'd like to start off today's presentation with an overview of the budget timeline. It is a little different this year. Typically, our timeline is designed to approve the budget before the end of the current year. But due to the complexities resulting from the pandemic, we've pushed this out about a month into January of 2021. However, the tax filing requirement remains the last Tuesday in December, so this timeline accommodates both of those factors. And as Gail mentioned, tonight we're going to focus on the Capital Projects Fund, our employee compensation recommendation, and the 2020 tax levy, which is collected in 2021, the recommendation for that. These are the biggest components of our of our budget. And then, as always, the important details related to all of the recreation and operational activities, we'll devote an entire meeting to that on December 3rd. But in between, at our next board meeting in November, the board would need to approve the Truth in Taxation resolution. So as a reminder, there are several steps required in the tax levy process. So the Truth in Taxation resolution is required to be adopted not less than 20 days prior to the approval of the district's tax levy ordinance. And this is where the board determines its estimated dollar amount for the 2020 levy. And if the increase was in excess of 5%, it would require a public hearing, but that is not the case with this budget proposal. So the board would just need to adopt that resolution in order to meet our timeline. Then again, at the first board meeting, in December, we'll go through the operating funds. And then at the second board meeting, the board would approve the tax levy ordinance. And that would allow us to file it with the county prior to the December 29th deadline. And also at that meeting, we're requesting direction from the board regarding any changes to what we've proposed. And we would also like the board to approve the budget and appropriation ordinance in tentative form as amended, if necessary, if there are changes that are requested by the board. And that would allow the 30-day public inspection period to begin after that second meeting in December, up until the next board meeting in January, which I expect would be January 21st. And after the 30 days have elapsed, we would have the public hearing on that date, after which the board would adopt the final budget and appropriation ordinance at the same meeting. Does anyone have any questions regarding the timeline? Okay, hearing none, as I mentioned, next we'll be presenting the 21 proposed capital projects fund recommendation. Superintendent Wolf is going to provide details regarding the projects, and then I will return to explain how we plan to pay for the improvements with a look at how the bond refinancing that Bob just explained and the borrowing plan fits into our capital plan, as well as what our capital asset replacement plan projections look like over the next 5 years. So with that, I'd like to turn it over now to Superintendent of Buildings and Grounds, Terry Wolf.
Thank you, Sandra.
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry, really quickly.
Okay.
I know that we traditionally outline the budget this way. I had a quick question though, just to kind of level set as we're listening to the proposed capital budget. Is the capital budget based upon a levy, a CPI increase?
The capital budget?
Yeah, are we including?
That's a trick question. So the budget itself for the operating tax levy does not include the CPI tax levy increase, and we'll get to that at the end of the presentation.
Right.
As Bob talked about that debt service extension base, that does incorporate the CPI component as to what we're borrowing against. So I don't know if that clarifies it.
A little bit. I know we're going to talk about the levy more later, but we always get really excited about some of the projects that we start to hear about. But then when we start to talk through some of the financial implications, it changes a little bit. In previous years it has. So I just wanted to understand, like, as we're looking at the proposed capital budget right now, if it's based on a board approved increase.
The capital budget, no, it relies on the bond borrowing and what we're able to transfer from operations.
Super. All right, thank you.
Okay.
Well, wait a minute though. It wouldn't, from a standpoint of the debt service that would result from this budget, that would fall under the realm of the tax levy, would it not?
The debt service does, yes, that's correct. But the debt service is based on the bonds that are issued. There's not a.
Yeah, right. But to Commissioner Harrington's point, so let's say that we're going to determine tonight that we're not going to increase the tax levy. And I think you're preparing your budget on that assumption, if I'm not mistaken. And so to Commissioner Harrington's point, what you've proposed here from a capital budgeting standpoint, the debt service piece of that's going to have to come, it's going to be funded by the tax levy, is consistent with whatever tax levy you've recommended here, which I think is zero increase.
Correct. And the tax levy for debt service is always based on what bonds we've issued. So it does change from year to year based on the structure of the bonds. And I've included, which we'll get to, what that dollar amount is, how it's different from what it was last year. But that's not something we have any discretion over. That's based on the bonds that are outstanding.
I understand.
Okay. Just want to be clear.
Does that help with your question though, Commissioner Harrington?
It did, Finance Guru O'Donnell, thank you. And Superintendent DeAngelis, thank you.
Okay, I'll be back.
All right, well, thank you. We are going to now move into the capital budget presentation for this year. Just as a reminder, as you know, part of the capital budget process, every year, you know, we go through a lengthy process with staff in determining what capital projects we will be requesting and presenting to the board. And as a reminder, we always look at first the replacement and repairing of existing assets. We do consider commissioner priorities. We do look to the 2013 master plan, and then we consider new initiatives that are based on both community and staff input when determining our capital needs from year to year. So as we did last year, as we go through the presentation, you'll see that in certain situations, I will have used a different color font just to help call out items that are replacement and upkeep of our existing infrastructure. And then I'll use, that'll be in a black colored font. I'll use blue for any new amenities, and then green will identify priorities that the commissioners have put forward for us. You will find this year that the vast majority of the font colors will be black. So we're going to start here at Centennial Park. At the fitness center, we do have 2 treadmills. These treadmills were purchased and installed in 2011. These are older machines. They will be 10 years old next year, and they do have a pretty excessive wear. I know Manager Mirren and I spoke the other day, and she indicated that they look worn out and dated, and there's some areas on them that are actually beginning to rust. So these are ones that we felt strongly that are up for replacement. They were actually originally scheduled to be replaced 2 years ago, and then put on hold, this year. And now we're finally proposing to move forward with that purchase next year. I do want to point out that traditionally we would have had a much larger budget number for new equipment at the fitness center. But this year we are proposing to use this 17,520, which is the remaining balance that we had available in the 2020 budget when we halted capital projects. So we're merely just suggesting that we continue with this purchase and that or with this budget that's available, and not asking for new dollars next year. In addition, at the fitness center, we do have some rooftop units or HVAC units that are in need of replacement. This particular unit, unit number 1, does serve the men's locker room area. As you can see, it was installed in 2006. And in last year in October, we already had a part of this particular unit fail that caused us to invest a decent amount of money in repairs, and that was in October. We had a new heat exchanger. I did discuss with staff about, well, does that mean we can extend the life of this because we put in this heat exchanger? Did we buy ourselves some time? And unfortunately, we do not feel that we did. Well, we got it functional. There's other components within the unit that could also fail and then cause us additional large expenses without really, extending the life of this unit in general. So it really helped me in determining and understanding that it was important that this unit be replaced. Typical rooftop units have a life expectancy of around 15 years, according to the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And I do also want to point out that for this rooftop unit, as well as the 2 other rooftop units that we're requesting budget to replace this year, we've increased the previous anticipated budget by an additional $2,000 for each unit, with the idea that we would be looking to use a bipolar ionization technology. This is an air cleaning technology that's very effective and efficient in dealing with, viruses, bacteria, and other particles in the air, and would help us with drastically improving our air quality in the spaces served by all these units. So the next unit is rooftop unit number 2. This particular unit, also installed in 2006, is a little bit smaller unit. This one serves the women's locker room. And then unit number 5 serves the office area of the fitness center. It's a little bit older. This one was installed in 2005. Unfortunately, we also had a heat exchanger fail and need to be replaced on this unit in October of last year as well. Again, indicating the need for a replacement. Moving on to the indoor pools, the leisure pool heater was installed in 2008. The typical pool heater has a life expectancy of between 7 to 12 years, so we are definitely at the far end of that life expectancy. And so we are suggesting that we replace this as well as the other 2 heaters for the other 2 pools, because they were all installed at the same time. One of the primary concerns with letting these go too much longer is that since they are at the end of their life expectancy, and a failure of any of these would cause a catastrophic issue where we would not be able to heat the pool, and we'd have to close it down for a period of time until we could get a new unit. These are not units that are typically sitting on a store shelf, and so it could be a lengthy shutdown at a time that would not be advantageous for us. Now, specifically, when we look at the Lat Pool Heater, we do feel that this unit is a bit undersized for the pool, and it has caused us some additional concerns when doing our backwashing, our normal cleaning procedures for the pool, where we have to, in order to clean the filters, we have to reverse the flow of the pool, and we actually dump some of the water to cleanse out the sand filter media. And when we do that, we obviously introduce fresh water to the pool so that we have the appropriate number of gallons. In doing this in the middle of winter, sometimes that water temperature can be 35, 36 degrees, and that creates quite a challenge when we're adding in a couple of thousand gallons of new water into that pool. It takes quite a bit of time for us to get that water back up to temperature with this unit. We've been tracking this hourly for many years just to see what the impacts are. And because of that, we've had to switch some of these operations to an evening, like middle of the night operation, just to give us a little more time in getting water to heat back up. So, with this needed replacement, we're hoping that we can size this a little more appropriately with the addition of the new efficiencies in heaters. And then the final heater is the one for the spa. Again, was installed in 2008. I did include a note here, and it pertains to all of the rooftop units as well as the heating units that I've just mentioned and discussed. We did include a engineering fee total, as we will have to go out to bid for the replacement of these units because they're all related to HVAC. We anticipate that we would do one bid for this project, and we would need to use an engineer for this. We did budget an amount $14,230, which is about 18% of the overall replacement cost, anticipated replacement cost of these units. I feel that's a pretty fair estimate of what engineering costs should cost for this project. So next, at the Centennial Activity Center, we have a fire alarm system replacement planned for planning and designing purposes for next year. This year we did learn that the backup battery charging system on this particular unit had failed. And because the unit was installed, or the system was installed in the 1990s, it's no longer being produced or supported, and we're no longer able to get parts. So because we have this, the backup battery is not able to charge because that charging system is broke, we had to look for aftermarket parts. We did secure an aftermarket part, had the contractor come out, make the installation, just to find out that that aftermarket part also was not functional. So we're currently securing another aftermarket part that we will replace to get us running again with the backup battery charging. So the system's functional, it currently works, but if the power drops, then we don't have a battery there to help keep that system supported and running until the power comes back on. This being an older system, it's currently grandfathered in, but non-compliant with some of the new existing codes. So when we get to the point of needing to replace the panel, which is a recommended procedure here, we have to bring a lot of the other areas up to code, which becomes a more significant installation. What we are proposing is this amount of money for the planning and design, and this is based on reaching out to engineers and architects that we would work with on this project. And we've already anticipated a replacement budget that is in our longer term projections for 2022 of approximately $55,000 for the replacement of this particular unit or system. In addition, at the activity center, the copy machine is in need of being replaced. It has heavy usage. It's got a useful life of 5 to 10 years, and it was purchased in 2012. The idea is that this will be repurposed over to the hockey building, which has less demand, especially now during COVID. So instead of what we had initially planned was a purchase of 2 copy machines, we felt like this was a more appropriate approach. So next we're going to move on to Hinckley Park, but before I do that, I want to say that if anybody has any questions during this presentation, please don't hesitate to stop me and ask me any questions that you might have in these areas. I also neglected to acknowledge Project Manager Meunier, who is on the meeting with us and available to help with any questions. She was extremely instrumental in helping us put together our capital budget plan, as well as this presentation for this year. And I couldn't have done this without her help. So I wanted to make sure I acknowledged and thank her as well.
Hey, Carrie?
Yes.
I had a couple of quick questions then before you went on. So going back to the treadmills, so the $17,520, that was not actually the price of the treadmills, and that was just what was left in the budget for that. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, yes, but I believe that that is an appropriate amount to purchase those treadmills. Superintendent Armour might have a little more detail on that particular item, but that's my understanding, yes.
Okay, because I worked out, did the math that was $8,760 per treadmill, which seemed a little expensive. So I was wondering, I just wanted to clarify that point. And then B, I wanted to see like if the treadmills are in fact less than that, what would happen to the whatever is left from the 17,520? Would it just
That
go
is the-
towards one of the other purchases, or what would happen?
That is the going rate for commercial treadmills that last longer with the heavy use. The ones that you get at your home are definitely less expensive. You do have to pay a little more for getting the commercial ones. So if there was if we did happen to get a lower rate next year for some reason, then that would go back into the capital fund, or if there was enough money to purchase something else, we would.
All right. Okay, I just kind of wondered about that. And then one of the other questions I had is in terms of the copier, I think it's great that you'll be able to repurpose the current one over at the activity center over to the Hawk Center. But I was wondering, did you also consider leasing costs for the Centennial Activity Center copier? And if so, how did that compare?
That's a good question. I'm going to actually ask if Superintendent DeAngelis has any information on this, because this is something that the IT department researched.
Yes. So I don't believe that we looked at specifically leasing just that machine. The issue is, I think that in order for a lease to be really effective, we would want to look at more than one machine. And the problem is we have different usage at different areas and different replacement needs. And I think when we've looked at this before, it wasn't particularly advantageous, but we did not do a specific cost analysis between a lease and just that machine at this time.
All right, I was curious if that had been looked at. And then also I just wanted to say, yeah, like given the current situation, the bipolar ionization technologies definitely seems like a reasonable, worthwhile upgrade. And also thank you for you and your staff for all the work you put into this.
Thank you.
All right, that's all I had for right now.
Perfect, thanks. Did anybody else have any questions on the last section of slides before we move on? All right, hearing none, we're going to move on. And again, please don't hesitate to stop me on a slide-by-slide basis. It's probably a great time to talk about it. We'll have a picture and some data points there to refer to if needed. So at Hinckley Park, the athletic field lighting there has been in place since 1988 for most of them, and 1992 for another section of them. Currently, the athletic field lighting that we're talking about covers 3 ball diamonds, and there's an additional few heads on a few of those poles that covers a football field that runs between ball field number 1 and 2 over at Hinckley Park. The electrical wiring for these poles were installed back in the 1970s, and they are a direct burial. So the wiring is it's covered in a coating, a rubber insulator, but it's just buried directly in the ground. The issue is, especially with the amount of time that's gone by, is that these parts and pieces, they start to wear out and degrade. And so we've had a few occasions over the past few years where we have lost the electrical connection because these wires are just laying in the ground. It's really difficult for us to trace and understand where they're at. And we've had to hire a contractor to do some directional boring because we don't have the ability to just pull new wires back out of the existing conduit and replace it with new wires as needed. So we've had this happen a couple of times over the past few years, and of course these always happen right during peak time ball games, either in session or about to start, and you can't get the lights to function, and that's always very problematic. And it takes several days to weeks to get a contractor out to run the lines, and then it's tens of thousands of dollars to have that work done. So the replacement cost that we are projecting for this would be around $500,000. I do want to point out that this is one of the projects that is listed as a TIF eligible project, and we do have money available and shown in our capital budget projections that would anticipate us getting reimbursement for some of this work through the city as a reimbursement on the TIF agreement over the next 2 payment timeframes that we have laid out. When we looked at replacing these lights, we contemplated a couple of different options, and we have actually 4 options that range in cost from $260,000 all the way up to $1.3 million. The 1.3 would include us replacing all of the light poles with new, metal poles, new LED lights, new electrical conduits in the ground with new wiring to all the different light poles. That seemed like it was a bit high in our budget, what we could afford, and so what we had done is we've actually completed a evaluation of the existing wood poles. We had someone come out, do an evaluation. They did a small boring in them and provided us an analysis of the wood and the condition of the wood. And we've identified that most of the poles are still in good shape, but that we have 5 poles that we should consider replacing if we're going to be doing this project. So this project at this cost contemplates replacing those 5 poles and then putting new LED light fixtures at the top of the existing poles plus the new poles, as well as running new conduit and electrical wiring to each one of those locations. We think this gives us the benefit of having the new conduit and having good electrical connections. It gives us the benefit of better light control at lower cost, more efficient, without the huge expense of doing the poles. And while that would be nice and ideal to do right now, again, we were looking for ways to make this work within money that we had available in our budget.
So Terry, Commissioner Harrington, baseball parent and football parent, have been there when the lights have gone out, and it is a heavily used park. My only question is, I know we've been contemplating, and we'll discuss in a moment, the master plan
Yes.
potential for Hinckley. So how does replacing the lights now kind of dovetail with potential future projects there?
Well, so you're taking away a little bit of my thunder, and we will get to, no, that's okay. We will get to a slide where we talk about the OSLIDE grant and how these things have an impact. One of the primary reasons that we are still moving forward with this recommendation is that it's considered infrastructure. And so this wouldn't be an eligible amenity towards an OSLIDE grant anyway. In addition, we have this listed as something that we can get reimbursement through the TIF project.
The TIF
so
side. Got it.
it's kind of a 2-pronged reason for that. But I mean, most importantly, because they're existing lights and these is infrastructure, they wouldn't even count towards an OSLIDE grant. They would, if we were to apply for this on its own, they would say that's not good. Or if we applied for a grant and had this as one of the amenities, they'd say, I'm sorry, you've fallen short. This doesn't count. So.
So that's helpful on the financing side, but just with regards to actually planning for the site, we would hate to replace lights and then say, oh, as part of our master plan in 2 years, we're going to remove these lights, have to not use them, remove them here. I'm assuming you're taking this into account.
Yeah, I am. And I think, we do have all the master planning that we have contemplated to date and that we've looked at hasn't really included the need to move or relocate the athletic fields. So we don't anticipate a need to move the lights. Those would be still in their same locations. Okay. That park is pretty tight. We've just spent a lot of money on keeping a tennis court where it is, which dictates where, ball diamond 3 can be, which it's kind of a trickle down effect. We don't have a lot of room to change and modify that park layout. So.
Great. Thanks.
You're welcome. So moving on to the community gardens, and this is one that we are proposing that we could do as a phase 1. It would cover in general the area that you see highlighted there. So we've got an area available on top of the existing water reservoir here at Hinckley Field that we feel could serve the needs of a community garden very well. The amount of money that we're proposing for this right now would cover just that one portion of it, and this would be something that we would be doing primarily in-house with staff. we would be constructing wooden boxes with staff, and then hiring a contractor to come in and do, some of the plumbing needs to get the water spigots and everything out there. So we also would have to hire a contractor to install a gate and a fence so that the area is enclosed and secured, and hopefully keeping out some of the critters that would want to, lunch on the vegetables and things out in the garden. We do want to point out that, this was a project that we had been, or an amenity that we've been talking with our architects about as it relates to the OSLAD grant that we were hoping to apply for this year. To do this in its entirety, with hiring the contractors out, we would anticipate would cost us around $125,000. So we're definitely looking at a way that we can, scale this and use staff and make this work. Should we decide to go forward with that. And so one of the primary concerns, and this kind of bleeds into the next slide here a little bit, is that this would have an impact on an OSLAD grant, or could have an impact on an OSLAD grant should we do that. So one of the things that we're thinking or considering is that we should, consider this project and put the money towards the project and have it available in the budget, but then maybe further consider if we want to still go after an OSLAD grant and include this as part of that OSLAD grant application. And then if for some reason the OSLAD grant does not become available next year, we would still have the money available, and we could make a decision during the year to move forward with the project at that time. So I'm sure Commissioner Grau has some questions and comments on this. And we could maybe talk about it here, but I do want to bring up our next slide, and maybe you could ask your questions and we could talk about it then, or I can go through some of this stuff and talk about, because the next part of this is going to talk about how these really have an impact on each other.
I want to talk about the $80,000 price tag.
Okay.
North Park, we had a $50,000 price tag. We needed sidewalks, accessible, wheelchair accessible path, and water. And here, I don't think we need any of that, and it's 80,000.
Yeah, so we do need an accessible path, and we do have still water, which that's been a challenge either way. One of the things that when we were looking at it previously at North Park, those were things that we were looking at the time with staff. It was a couple of years ago. We have since looked at these budgets with our architects and have had a chance to really refine what these unit costs are. And the sense is that really $80,000 would be still pretty tight with some of the things we've got to do out there.
I still can't wrap my head around that. You're building the boxes. There is accessible walkway up to that site already. And you're sitting and you're sitting on the water for the city.
Yeah, I know, but we still have to hire a plumber to come in and run water there. We've got to put up some fencing. We've got to put in, I would assume, limestone screenings, and at some point in there, we'd probably have to do some under drainage because it doesn't have a whole lot of depth for the water to drain out. We want to make sure we don't create a situation where it gets saturated, because after heavy rains, we have occasions where that area can fill up and it takes a little while to drain out, and that could make it a little bit more problematic. So there's definitely some work to be done out there, and while that may be a little bit on the high end, what we don't want to do is project a budget of less than what we really need to get the project done. So. You're muted, Commissioner.
Sorry, I just had a quick question. In terms of looking at the budget for it, yeah, the 80,000 is a little scary, but I had actually, my uncle-in-law was on the board of the Kenosha Elder Garden, and that price is a little higher than what they did, but not crazy higher. So it doesn't sound as unreasonable to me. But one of the important things they did is they kind of really used it as a community fundraising thing where, like different people could pay for, like the various raised beds and things like that. And then, you get your little placard on there. And I mean, is that something that you and your team have talked about to help defray the costs if we don't end up ever getting any grant money for this?
We haven't really talked specifically. It sounds like you're talking about like not just the yearly rental of the plots, but more of, getting someone to have almost a memorial garden bed or something like that.
Right, like families want to put their name on a bed. Somebody wants to honor somebody who passed and loves gardening. Maybe, various scout troops might get involved, because I mean, one of the things that I really love about this as an amenity is, first of all, that it would be a really great thing for an underserved population like the elderly in times when having outdoor activities where they can still have social contact would really be a critical thing to add, but that it's also not limited to one particular demographic. Like, as much as I love playgrounds, like they're pretty much, there's only one target demographic that's big for, whereas this is something like, kids could learn from it, adults could learn from it, older people could utilize it. And I wonder if this is an opportunity where there could be some fundraising efforts to help defray the costs up front.
Sure. Yeah, I had never contemplated, nor had I ever heard of someone doing what you suggested with, selling the opportunity for garden plots. But I think that's an interesting idea that we could certainly look into. I think, the staff all feel like this, would be a good amenity and something that the community would value. The pricing on, as we've gone through with many different projects from time to time, it's pricing is a challenge. It's something we're doing our best to make our best estimate at and give a most realistic estimate that we can. We're not trying to make it sound expensive so that we don't move forward with it or anything else. But I think for us right now, my primary concern, and I think maybe this is a good time to kind of get into this conversation, is how this could have an impact on an OSLAD grant. And so as everyone recalls, we did begin the master planning process for Hinckley Park, and we were anticipating moving forward and completing that earlier this year. When the pandemic hit, we put a halt on that process. But we had already completed some early and preliminary drawings that we were getting ready to start to share with the board and the public and have these conversations before we halted it. And then ultimately the OSLAD grant program was not available for this year. But when we do apply for an OSLAD grant, one of the main things that you have to do, the first kind of rule or test, is that you have to have 5 recreational amenities. And for this project, we had been considering the community garden as one of those staple amenities that we would be adding in. Then ADA trails, a picnic shelter. We were looking to do cornhole, and then we really need to consider the playground as a potential item on there as well. And so what happens is that we, without adding in significant additional cost to the project overall, if we already construct the community gardens, we lose that amenity, and it really becomes challenging for us to hit enough to get a good grant application. And this rest of this project might not make sense anymore. So that's the one that's a very unfortunate part about this, because I know we've had multiple conversations over years about this and talked about doing this. And previously in the year, I was asked about this, and optimistically I said, yeah, we could move forward on this project. And I still say that we could move forward on it. But after having the time to look through this and understand it, I'm not so sure that necessarily something we should plan to do without the OSLAD grant application, but we could do that still. And we could take the approach like I suggested, where we have the money available. If the grant program is not available, well, maybe we don't want to wait forever and we just move forward with it. So yeah, Commissioner Grau.
I just want to know if you can add amenities to the community garden, say a shed for tools, or potting benches, or compost enclosures, or things like that. I mean, can you enhance the community garden?
As far as for the OSLAD grant application?
Yes.
Like to add amenities to that list of 5 recreation?
Yeah.
I asked Jennifer Meunier, if you have any additional knowledge or background on that. She does a lot of work with our grant administrators in Springfield and might have a little more insight on that. Perhaps she doesn't. Some of those things sound like they might be more in the line of what they would consider a non-amenity or maintenance amenity. But Jennifer, do you have any insight on that?
I'm thinking that we would get more points for more amenities within the garden. Is that the question?
Yeah.
If the garden was built and you added like a compost area or a tool shed or benches or potting benches or something like that. I mean,
no, that wouldn't count. That wouldn't give us any advantage. It's the main component of the garden itself. The other amenities are just considered auxiliary amenities.
And then my other comment on that is that's if OSLAD is giving grants next year, and based on election results, Illinois is going to have some major financial problems. So it's, wait another year to see another year, which is what we did this last year to see if we could put it in OSLAD, and there was no OSLAD. So now we're going to wait another year to see if we can put it in OSLAD.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a challenging situation and one that we certainly wanted to have the board weigh in on.
I have a question, I guess 2 questions. First of all, so I thought you said, Terry, that you're proposing that we budget, that the budget includes the $80,000 in case the OSLAD grant doesn't work, correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay, then the follow-up to that is, it seems to me in the back of my head that we can't begin work on that project even if we budget it, because then we pull it out of the grant OSLAD, right? That's correct, right?
Yep.
Okay, but is the mere putting it in the budget, does the OSLAD approve? Does that jeopardize our OSLAD approval by that we have this money budgeted aside?
No.
Okay.
No, in fact, we have to certify that we have money and funds available prior to submitting for the OSLAD.
Okay.
So,
all right. Great clarification. So that was all the question I had on it. And I don't know, I guess it's a gamble as to whether or not, we're going to get the OSLAD grant.
Well, they usually announce, this is Executive Director Monk. So they usually, for this one, the development grant, which this one would be the $400 matching one. This one usually comes out in July if it's going to come out, or I should say summer sometime, June or July usually. And we should know that, by then. And if, depending on what the board decides with gardens, we could then start them. If we hear there's not going to be grant money, I would say then, if we were going to go the option of trying to get it into the grant and that doesn't go through for this year, we just go forward, anyway. So it could still be a project this year, either way that we look at it.
A quick question. The $80,000 allotment is only for a portion of where the garden could expand to, correct? So is there any disadvantage in an potential OSLAD grant application to go forward with the community garden at that $80,000 rate in the spring, right? If we budget for it, and then when and if there's an OSLAD grant available, and Commissioner Grow, I echo your sentiment about the if, we could use the second half of the community garden to be one of our amenities, proposed amenities, like an extension amenity. Would that fit the qualifications?
I don't believe it would. I think we'd probably want to get further clarification on that, but I don't believe it would, because it would be, we would already have the existing amenity there. And so it wouldn't be a new introduction of an amenity to the community. So, we, even when going for the woodland.
I was going to bring that up, yeah.
We almost got shot in the foot on that grant because we had one single pickleball court that we decided to squeeze in at Northeast Park. That was, I think it was allowable and it worked because it was a certain distance away from where we were proposing pickleball courts. So that alone, while we were doing what we could to try to meet the needs of the community, almost jeopardized $400,000 grant for us.
I believe
So
the first time we got rejected, that was one of the reasons they said you already have that amenity. So they do look at that. Mhm.
From a Hinckley Pool perspective, I mean, I would imagine that there are some replacement opportunities of an amenity beyond useful life, just given the not only historic nature but age of that facility. So are there some recommendations? I'm sure you guys have thought through, you know, different measures of these 5 potential OSLAD components, but I would hate to see us not move forward on a community garden during this time and have it wait again for a potential OSLAD grant, just because for many of us who have been on the board for a number of years, we have revisited this issue so many times in so many different parks, and we finally have a great spot to put it in.
Yeah.
So is there an opportunity for the staff to go and perhaps think through another amenity? There's a lot of need. It's a great and heavily trafficked park, either at the pool, the skate park. I mean, I think there's some other amenities that could use some beyond useful life opportunities.
Yeah, and I those are excellent points. And you know, we've already kind of looked through the list of amenities that exist that might be beyond their useful life and in need of replacement, and or you know, what could we bring to the table? And you know, there's opportunities, there's other things that we could look at potentially, but we really feel like this is a very strong amenity. Obviously, it's a brand new, unique, something that we don't have anywhere else in the district, and it would serve a lot of people with a very popular new thing. So it would really bring a lot of strength and interest to the committee that looks at these. One of the challenges we have when we apply for these grants is there's not like we can call up someone or go down a list and be like, oh, look, they got cornhole on there, that works, and that gives us a point. Like we have to, you know, like we vet this internally as a group, and then we reach out to our architects who have dealt with many more OSLAD grant applications before, and we have to just kind of talk these out. And what do you think? Do you think this will work? Do you think this will cut it? You know, what do you know about what other people are doing this year, and what are the other projects? What are we up against? And so that's kind of the challenge here, is that there's no one size fits all or one clear path to an OSLAD grant, which is great, but we could move forward with this and we'd be fine to do that. But what we're saying, I guess, as a staff, is that we feel that this would probably put us in a much less likely position to be successful in that grant application. And so we're just providing, these are the list of amenities that we think would make us the most successful. If we look at some of those other ones, the additional cost to do a skate park per se, it kind of negates the whole value of adding it as an amenity, because it would exceed, probably, to do that right, it would probably exceed the cost of the grant money we'd get. So that's where it gets to be a little bit tricky too. It's a little bit of, how much does it cost you to go after that part of the grant?
The community garden we really saw as sort of the crown jewel of the OSLAD grant process, because it is a brand new amenity to the district, and that does weigh, we found that it does weigh heavily on their decision-making process. When you're introducing a brand new amenity that appeals to a wide variety of people, that really does go a long way with them. So that was our thought.
You don't think the rooftop deck and garden concessions over the maintenance building could be a potential?
I would love a rooftop on the building here for a garden, but
we could rival FFC.
No, she's saying a concessions. She's saying, I could hear what Harmony's saying. Hey, that's a consideration. I think the other thing is, we know the skate park, you know, needs to be addressed as well. But as Superintendent Wolf said, that's a big project with a lot of, probably we'd be seeing a lot of public input, and it's more of a, you know, that's going to be a whole process in itself. You know,
plus a high dollar amount.
We would go to concrete on that when and if we replace that. So
I just want to clear this up in my head too. So what we're concerned about, for the sake of discussion, let's assume that that there's consensus that the $80,000 should be part of the budget, and that we're going to do that, and then we're still going to go for the OSLAD grant, and that everybody is great with that. If we don't get the OSLAD grant, then I think if I just want to make sure that Commissioner Grau's concern is we don't know until July, and that means that this project would start in July and really wouldn't be available in 2021, correct? I just want to make sure that I'm clear on what
Correct.
the concern is. Okay, that's great.
Exactly. Another year, another delay.
And we
Right.
we
But
are,
the project,
yeah, we understand. Go ahead.
but so I guess my next question is, if we knew 100% right now that we were going to get an OSLAD grant, but we weren't going to get it until July, would that be okay? No,
It's
because
still
you
gonna
want,
be a year delay. It's still going to be a year delay, but we'll have money.
And we'd be able to implement the full community garden plan, both phase 1 and phase 2. And phase 2 includes a lot of those amenities that you were speaking about, Cindy, with the tool sheds, the shade structure, more benches, things like that. This first phase is just the planter boxes and pretty much water to the site.
and this may have been said, but if we approve this and we say, well, whether we say, okay, $80,000 and you need to start working on it and we'll find something else for the OSLAD grant, when does the community garden get completed if we were just to forget about the OSLAD grant part of it?
If that was the direction of the board, then it would be our priority in the springtime, and our goal would be to make sure it's available for the planting season, which in our area traditionally is in the neighborhood of Mother's Day.
Okay. I just want to make sure that what we were talking about. So we're talking about the difference between Mother's Day and Labor Day. It probably, if we're depending on how we're going to get this funded, right?
Yeah,
when the project could start.
Yeah, and if there was an OSLAD grant and we did put it in for an application, and it could be quite a while before we heard, and then it would be then, in early 2022
Okay.
that we would do construction. So
that's the timeline I wanted to know. Okay, I just wanted to have it clear in my head, and I'm sure that Commissioner Grau knew all of that beforehand, and I just didn't or wasn't paying attention. So
No, I wanted it clarified as well.
Right.
It's just, you wait for the grant, and during the Rauner years, then, we waited, we even got granted a grant, but didn't get the money. So
Right.
you can even win the grant and not be able to go ahead because you don't have the money.
that's true.
Very true. Very true. And I was going to clarify that the June, July estimated timeframe is you can apply, right? And then we don't hear sometimes until fall, winter. I mean, sometimes, so Terry's timeline is correct. It'd be a whole nother year. So we can certainly consider other options if that's what, the board would like us to do, for the site. It would just be adding to our capital, right? But that's fine. We can start looking at that. But I think that's a big question that, we don't want an answer tonight. Just start thinking about it for,
right.
When we approve
Yeah.
the budget.
All right. Any other questions or discussion on on this portion, Commissioner Tunnel?
I was curious the difference between phase 1 and phase 2, the cost. Just ballpark.
Jennifer, could you speak to that?
It's going to be over, as I said, the 80,000 is in-house, kind of not very extravagant. The other things we would have to contract out a little bit more with, like we had a arbor shade structure planned, some tool sheds, some different seating amenities. I'd have to go back and look at how that would parse out with. We haven't really looked at it to be parsed out with phase 1 and phase 2 with the way that we're doing phase 1, but it would probably be double what we're talking about now.
But in phase 1, as presented, could be usable.
Not double, but over 80,000, because we would be adding the same amount of planters plus different amenities that would have to be approved by the board. So it would be a range. because we don't really have that plan figured out yet.
You're right, phase one would be usable.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because I would hate to have, here we are after so many years, here's your boxes, but we have to wait another 2 or 3 years till we have a little more money to put dirt in. So I just want to make sure.
No, we would definitely make sure they're usable right away.
Yeah, I love the design. It looks great, whoever came up with that. So nice work.
So
And I
could they be horseshoe? They look a lot like horseshoe, you know, fields, whatever you want to call them. So could phase one be a horseshoe tournament area? And then if we get the OSLAD grant, then we decide to change the horseshoe thing to a community garden? I'm just spitballing here. And
it would be a new amenity.
Tongue fully in cheek, but so anybody that's watches this later, I'm really not proposing to do something dishonest. I just thought it would be funny.
I think that we would love to hear ideas. If you have other ideas for what we could add, recreational amenities, certainly get those to us. And as we move through this conversation, in the next month. The other thing I did want to point out for clarification, just please note that this says Hinckley Park Conceptual Master Plan. This plan that is in, that has been proposed, we have not vetted this through all the meetings and, the board at all. We stopped this, the process when COVID hit. That was one of the things we pulled. And we do not have the finances in this budget for this entire plan. I mean, that's a whole other conversation, above and beyond the 400,000. So just to point that out.
But we do plan to take this conceptual plan to a full master plan this year with community input.
Right.
We have that funding available, so we will figure it out this year.
Yeah.
But it's not there yet.
So I have a question. This is Commissioner O'Donnell. How much money are we talking about that we possibly would receive with this grant?
It's a maximum of
400,000.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's a maximum of $400,000 that you have to match with another 400,000, which, like I said, the plan in front of you, it would be equate to a lot more than that.
That's really a Hobson's choice to walk away from $400,000. But on the other hand, this is a project that we've been talking about for as long as I've been on the board. There's a lot of community interest in it. That's really a tough one.
It is.
So we don't need to, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I am a little jaded though. I agree with Commissioner Grau that given the state of the finances in the state of Illinois, whether they would even be a grant, I don't know. We're going to see, right? What you're asking us is, hey, do you want to put this in the budget, and we'll know more next year, and we'll take appropriate action. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah, that's a good summary of it, and we can further the discussion. It's just we're telling you where we think we have the best possible chance for an OSLAD grant.
I get that. I totally understand that.
That's all.
To walk away from 400,000 on one hand, yeah, that's not necessarily so responsible to our constituents, but on the other hand, not doing this project for the entire time that I've been on the board isn't very good service to our constituents either. So I'm troubled with the whole thing.
Yep.
Yeah, and the 400,000 OSLAD grant is not a done deal nor guarantee, and there's additional investments that we would have to make in this project. And given we're operating amidst pandemic right now, we don't know the financial implications to the district going forward. Let's hope optimistically. There's a lot of ifs in this scenario when we could have an amenity with broken ground in the spring with folks being able to use it, pretty quickly.
Yeah, understood.
Yep.
All right. Well, that was a very good discussion. Thank you. I do believe that was probably the most difficult slide that I had to bring up for discussion tonight. So we'll be quick and easy from here on out.
We'll give you 5 minutes.
Done. All right, Hinckley Park is where we typically and traditionally budget for our vehicle replacements because this is where the Hinckley garage is at. So we're going to talk through most of those here. So one of the vehicles we are proposing to replace is this 2006 Ford F-250. It's a 4x4 with a plow. As you can see, it has excessive rust, relatively low miles for its age, but it has completely rusted and rotted throughout many areas. It's a F-250, so it's a little bit taller vehicle. The running boards, which is a step to assist staff getting into the vehicle, fell off last year, and staff was unable to find anywhere else to put a new one back on because there's nothing solid enough underneath it to do that. The idea here is that we would replace this vehicle with a smaller class vehicle. We would look to replace it with a Ford Ranger, but put a plow on that Ford Ranger. We think that this actually would really help out our overall. It's a less expensive vehicle up front, but beyond that, it would help out with our lot configurations. As we've been replacing some of these lots, we have a requirement to put these landscape islands in, so they're not just huge masses of asphalt, and it gets a little more tricky to kind of get in and out and plow some of those spaces, specifically areas like at Hinckley, along the commuter lot along Northwest Highway, and the Centennial parking lot. So this would help with maneuverability and also give us the ability to try to plow a few of the paths that we have versus using some of the other equipment. But we just feel like that would be a better vehicle in this situation. The other vehicle that we're proposing for this year is 2004 Ford Ranger. It does have almost 140,000 miles on it. Excessive oil consumption. It's rusted and rotted. And the reason that, while you'll see there's some detailed pictures on the bottom here, the reason it doesn't look quite as bad as the other vehicle is because for many, many years, this was the vehicle used by our parks maintenance manager, and it was kept in a heated garage, so it didn't have to go through as much weathering. So it's kind of a clear indication of being able to have garage space available for the vehicles can certainly help them last longer, but we unfortunately just don't have that luxury all the time. Since the time that this was completed and sent out, staff made me aware that we had an issue with this vehicle just this week, a few days ago, where while our mechanic, who is the only person that drives this vehicle now for obvious reasons, was driving to a park location and started smoking, and he was worried he wasn't even going to get it back to the garage. He did get it back to the garage. They've put it off to the side, taken the keys, and aren't letting anybody else drive it. And they actually came to me and asked what we would have to do to get this on the surplus property list. So it's kind of sitting right now at a point where it has no more use for us anymore. So we're definitely in need of a replacement. So moving on to equipment, I guess before I move on to equipment, I should point out that we had a number of vehicles up for replacement in 2020 that we did postpone based on wanting to be even more efficient with our capital spending this year. And all those vehicles, plus every year we have a plan to replace 3 vehicles because of the size of our fleet and their age, et cetera. We had all of those vehicles listed here for 2021. And so I went and worked with the staff closely to understand what specifically our needs were, what our greatest needs were, and redistributed some of those other vehicles to subsequent years. So that's why you're not seeing what could have been easily 5 vehicles up for replacement. We've narrowed it back down to 2, and we're just continuing to restructure as we see the value of these vehicles and how we can prolong them. We're using the vehicles more so now than we ever have because with the pandemic, we are not having staff, if at all possible, ride together in a vehicle. We do have some vehicles with crew cabs, and so if that's, and we need to put staff in a vehicle together from time to time, we require that they wear face masks so that they're safe as they can be. But that's one of the things that's caused us to have a lot of vehicle use, more so than really we ever have. And so it reemphasizes the need to keep these vehicles in good condition and usable. So moving on into the equipment, we've got a production mower. This is one of our large mowers that we consider production mower. This is a 2011. It has almost 5,400 miles, or just over 5,300 hours on it. Sorry, not miles. Which for a vehicle like this, it's considered high mileage. It has intermittent no start issues where staff goes to start it and cut the grass and it's just not functioning. And this particular type of mower is one that we would use to cut our large open fields, athletic fields, and spaces like that. So certainly having this not functional is very problematic. We are recommending that we replace it with this 16-foot cut mower. Last year we did replace one, if you recall, as part of the capital project budget, and we replaced our, we had a 16-foot that we got rid of and replaced it with a 12-foot. So then this year we had two 12-foot cut mowers, which definitely determined that we did need to have, it was better if we had a 12-foot and a 16-foot cut. And so now we're just kind of flopping and looking to sell a 12 to buy a 16-foot cut path mower. We are also proposing that it has a heated cab that can make a big difference on staff being able to get out and work through some inclement weather in the early months in the fall to make sure that the fields and things are cut and ready for all the athletic programming that we have. So this heavy equipment trailer, and I believe on the summary slide I had highlighted this in blue as a new amenity. And while it's not really amenity, it's a piece of equipment. It's something that we don't currently have. We have, many pieces of equipment, whether it's the mowers that we were just looking at, or some of our, tool cats or other pieces occasionally that we rent even, that we have no ability to transport them. And so we've run into a couple of situations over the years where we had a piece of equipment break down across town, and we had no way to get it back to the garage so that our mechanic could work on it. And we had to literally tie it up with chains to a vehicle and drag it across town on the streets, which creates all sorts of issues and concerns and causes a little wear and tear on the vehicles too. So what this would be is a trailer that could handle any piece of equipment that we have, and it would also be able to handle some of the equipment that we rent pretty regularly, such as a roller, to do other sorts of athletic field maintenance that we do with rollers and other things, parking lot maintenance. So this was probably one of the most heavily identified things that the staff was saying we really could use this trailer. It's become a real problem for us. So moving on to Hinckley Park Pool. These are the doors that lead to the mechanical space in the pump room to the east end of the pool. As you can see from the pictures, there is extensive rust in here, and right here you can see that the door is almost completely rotted through from the inside out, and this is just due to the corrosive nature of the pool chemicals and the age of this door. We would propose to replace this with a fiberglass door that would handle the chemicals better and would be similar to the door we just replaced over at the activity center last year. It's just to the left of the main entrance of the aquatic center. So moving on to JC Park, this was a project that was initially planned for 2020, and it was postponed due to COVID. This is, we are proposing a resurface of the tennis courts, where we would have do a grind and overlay. This would essentially give us another 8 to 15 years on this court to extend the need to do a full depth replacement like we did at Hinckley tennis courts just recently, because that's a much more expensive project to undertake. The idea there is that we want to start to try to space out some of these needs for larger capital improvements and give us a little more time with the useful life to extend with this process. So as a reminder, this tennis court was actually shut down earlier this year because of the severe cracking that you can see here. that crack is the width of a tennis ball completely, and really someone could hurt their ankle. So we did lock the gates and have removed the nets at this park. We really think that this is an important amenity for us to move forward with, especially with all the time that people are spending outside, the high interest of tennis in Park Ridge specifically. And this is something that if it's going to be in the budget, we're going to work towards getting done as soon as the weather breaks in the fall or in the spring. So moving on to Main Park. At Main Park, we are proposing to replace the roller shades and a few different programming rooms as well as several offices. These were roller shades that were in existence prior to the renovations and were never replaced because the existing ones wouldn't fit in the new areas and openings because there were some slight modifications to how those were done. We did have planned to do a portion of these this year in 2020, and the other half were planned to be done in 2021. We did postpone this project as part of the, because of the pandemic, and so we're proposing that we move forward with these replacements. As you can see from this example, this programming room, this wall of windows here faces the west, and so it becomes really problematic in the evening. It's like a big fishbowl. When it's dark out at night. And before it gets dark, while the sun's setting, that sun is shining right in here and can not only make it very difficult for participants to do anything or to take place in activities if they've got something they would have been viewing on a screen that becomes not possible because of the glare, but it can also have a big impact on the temperature in that room as well. So we think that this is something we should move forward with. Yes, Commissioner Grau.
Did we change those windows when we remodeled the building? Are those new windows?
These are not new windows, but in some of the situations they had like other dividers in between them, like drywall and columns in between them. And in some situations they had some that were added in. And so the shades would not fit within those spaces anymore.
So Sandra was back there, right?
This one is in the area of where Sandra was, I believe, yes.
And what was the solution then?
We had roller shades.
You did, but they're gone now.
They were removed with the demolition and they weren't part of the replacement.
Okay.
So is this, your original plan had been to do half in 1 year and half in another year. So is this for half or is this for the whole thing?
This is to go forward with all of them. We have 2 programming rooms and I believe 5 staff offices that need to get done. All right. Moving on to the electrical upgrades at the Main Park Leisure Center. This is a project that we had begun some planning with previously, and we have, through the process of doing the planning and investigation and engineering, we've determined that the switchboard on this is 60 years old and the panels are 40 years old. Each of these pieces of equipment have a typical life expectancy of around 30 years. And in addition, we've identified some areas of the building, many areas of the building where we still have cloth covered wires. We do maintenance on our electrical panels where we hire an electrician to come in and do tightening and things on the bolts and the nuts and the connections within these large panels, because with the high voltage, it's pretty common that it has a slight vibration, and as that electrical wire continues to vibrate in there, it can start to loosen the connections. When the connections get loose, it creates a little bit of a gap, and that could be an arc, and that arc can cause fire hazards. So we do stuff like that, and that was kind of the initial point in which we started to realize that you know, these panels are really old. We needed to look at what was going on. We found that we had these cloth wires and that we really needed to replace a lot of these components of this building. We had initially budgeted about $50,000 to complete not only the planning and design, but the work. And in the process, we have determined that the cost for the estimate for replacement is right around $96,000, and we've already invested $6,500 into engineering. So we're requesting an additional $70,000, and if you're doing the math on the side right now, you're saying that doesn't add up. We are asking or including in what we're estimating here about a $17,500 allowance for this project, just because of the scope and the timing and the importance of completing this on time. This would be a project that when we bid it out, we would include an allowance so that should something unforeseen or unexpected come up while we're in the midst of the project, it would give us the flexibility to move forward and make some adjustments to get that work done without having to wait for another board meeting for board approval on a change order or something. So it's a pretty common practice, especially with a project like this, and we do include allowances in a lot of our projects. And it's one of those things that it doesn't, if it's needed to be done, then we incur that expense. If it's not needed, then we don't incur the expense. Part of the safety in how we manage these and determine whether or not things are needed is, especially on a project like this, we would have an engineer helping us out through these things and reviewing any request for allowance use or change orders. And so if a contractor were to say, oh, well, we need to replace this and it's going to cost extra, they would be there helping us and representing us saying, no, that's covered by the contract, that's not eligible, or no, that's not necessary, that's not needed. So it's not just an open ticket for them to add costs to the project. It's very heavily vetted. But it's a process that we do to make sure that we have facilities and projects completed in a very timely fashion so we can get back to our programming. So pond improvements. This is an embarrassing picture, but this is what our pond looked like this summer. You know, as you're all aware, we've been working on the ponds for the past few years and working to try to improve them so that they have a good recreational value. The last couple of years, we've gone through the process of sediment removal on the West Pond. This is the West Pond. That sediment removal was to remove additional nutrients that we thought were feeding the algae and really affecting the algal blooms that we were having out there. Well, as you can see, that this year we had probably the worst algal bloom that we've had in a long time, and so it's caused me and staff to kind of take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, this was not supposed to happen. Do we need to take another path or look a little bit deeper into what's going on? Maybe there's even more, you know, to fix this pond than just this sediment removal. So the sediment removal was essentially 90–95% complete. And with this condition still, we're now working with a new contractor, and we know that we need to find out what exactly our issues are so that we can come up with a new plan. We're already working through that process. We've had some samples done of the water, and those are being analyzed. Right now, we know that we have an issue with dissolved oxygen, which creates problems for us if we want to do something to treat the algae, because if the dissolved oxygen is too low, which is our problem, and we introduce something to deplete the algae, we have a high chance of creating oxygen depletion, and we would have a large fish kill, and we certainly don't want to have that. So we have a lot of different issues. We're trying to look at some of the other, you know, chemical and biological components of the water, so that we can get a good recommendation on how to move forward. The budget here is a budget that was already in the budget and planned for us to continue with the sediment removal. We were going to move over towards the last little bit that we had in the West Pond, and then we were going to move over to the East Pond and start that process. So while I don't know, or I don't have a specific plan yet for this money, I'm hoping that we will have a solution that might include the need to expend a little bit of money. So I've asked for this money to be again allocated this year to go to this this purpose. So Commissioner Leduc.
Hi, yes. I was wondering if there had been anything really different though that you or the staff had done recently, because I was actually out at Wildwood about a week and a half ago, and the main pond looked beautiful.
Right.
Like, is it just that the season for algae and duckweed is past, or was there some new effort? I was kind of curious as to what happened.
Yeah, no, I wish it was some new effort, but it's really got more to do with temperature. We did attempt, we wanted to do something. We had hired this contractor to go out and take a look at it. And like I said, we took a reading on the dissolved oxygen, and they said, we can't make any treatments to this pond. We can't do anything with this, because if we do, there's a high chance that we'll have a fish kill. So we're really, our hands are kind of tied right now on what we can do. And it's really just a matter of the weather. The algae comes up a lot in the summer. It's a very, very shallow. That water there is like 4 to 5 feet deep. And it was probably all bit of that shallow, if not shallower this year, because we were in a drought for most of the year. And so there was so much evaporation. So that water heats up quickly. As it's heating up, it's releasing the oxygen. And then the oxygen bubbles, if you go out there and look at the algae, you can see it's like holding it up and pushing it up, and that's what happens to it. So we had a lot of other unfortunate timing issues that contributed to the way that this looked this year. When we normally would have put out our aerators was right when we were closed down with the pandemic. If we were going to do some treatments to help with this, we would have done it at the time right when we were closed with the pandemic and staff wasn't around. And then earlier this year, I had a couple of staff move to a different park district. Well, anybody that had an aquatic license that are licensed with the state to treat this pond moved on to a different park district, and all the staff that were planning on going to get their licensing this year couldn't go do that because none of those classes were available this year because of the pandemic. So we had a lot of very unfortunate things that led up to, hey, we had a really poor looking pond this year. A lot of it was we didn't have a lot of control, timing, and just other things that contributed to it. So so we're really just looking to get this back to a point where it's a useful recreational amenity for people, that you can cast a fishing line out and not get it stuck in a bunch of algae.
Carrie, can you explain that $23,751? That's not, we don't know the solution right now, and that's just the money we had allocated for this, for the period of, right, for this year. That's, we don't even know what that's going to cover yet, right? And we would assume
it could be that we go through this process and you know, the contractor says, you know, there's really nothing we can do in terms of a big project. We need to do XYZ maintenance, and it's going to cost about $1,000 a year, and then I wouldn't spend any of this money. He might say, you know what, you have these issues with the water, and the water will balance itself back out once you get all the rest of the sediment out. You need to continue doing that at the other pond, and you have to have faith eventually this will restore itself. So, you know, I'm not sure, but Gail is right. The reason this money is there in that odd dollar amount is because when we started this process, we knew that it was about, I think we had about $22,000 a year. Well, then as we moved it out a year, we increased it by, you know, what we thought would be an inflationary factor of 3% probably. So it was just the idea of this was what it was going to cost us to continue with the sediment removal. So yes, thank you, Gail.
And so just one more question, because you had mentioned that currently there's nobody on staff that has the, you know, licensing, but would know about the aquatic herbology or whatever of this. So are there staff members that will be able to take the training this year? Because I also noticed further on in the budget that the amount budgeted for staff development was severely decreased. So I was wondering if this was something that was still planned going forward.
Yeah, no, this I do anticipate that over the winter and early spring, when the trainings are generally available, that we would have staff get the certification necessary for being able to treat this. So, but it's a combination of, you know, we may need to hire some contractual, but it is my anticipation that we'll have some with the proper licensing so we can be a little more effective in this in the future. So that was not cut.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. So moving on to Main Park, or continuing on with Main Park, we are requesting that we get some money in the budget for the planning and design of the play structure there. It was installed in 1993, so that's 27 years old this year. Life expectancy for a playground is typically 15 to 20 years. It is one of our largest and probably one of our most heavily used playgrounds, and it supports all the early learning programs, preschools, camps, and obviously the whole neighborhood and community around there. It's very heavily used. It's a large playground, and so we anticipate that the replacement cost of this playground is going to be more so than what we would spend in a typical neighborhood park. And so we're actually estimating about $950,000 in 2023 for this replacement. Now, if we decide that we are going forward with the OSLAD and doing the playground there at Hinckley, we may need to push this one back a little bit, but we do still think it's appropriate for us to begin the design process. And the cost of hiring an architect and engineers and everything that we have to do with this, and then construction documents, budgeting for the total cost of the project, we're really looking at it's around 10 to 11% of the overall cost, which would be an appropriate amount to spend on this process. So,
had you told us earlier that you were going to expand this as well, or am I thinking of something else?
At a previous time, we had, contemplated whether or not we thought this might be a location or an opportunity to, expand this to be I'm lost on the right word here, but like an all-inclusive playground that is very heavily designed for special needs individuals. And so, we kind of contemplated that, and it certainly is something we could talk about, but that really comes at a higher price tag. And beyond that, we still anticipate that we would have all the components for people with varying different needs. We're required to have those varying needs addressed for park users, and we would certainly meet or exceed those as well. So that might be what you're recalling. I don't know specifically an expansion.
No, more about the footprint. So would the footprint be the same, or were you talking about expanding the footprint?
We would probably go through that during the design process. I hadn't really anticipated expanding it from what it is. It's already a pretty large footprint, but that's something that might be considered as we go through it. So it just depends on how we end up laying this out. But initially, I wouldn't anticipate that.
I think we talked about some other amenity over there or something. I do remember that something was going to go more toward those soccer fields. I don't remember that it was this.
Yeah, I thought it was this.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't this. I think at some point I heard some conversation about trying to expand into that field with more nature programming and trails or things like that. But
I
think
it.
Yeah, correct. That was a conversation we had at one point in the last year, I believe. It was maybe on one of our perk tours as well. We talked about some of the commissioners' desire to look at the concept of making those athletic fields behind Main Park that would connect, make it more of a nature-themed whole park. So that would be something we would explore if we wanted to do something like that at the time we went through the master planning process. And then it was also discussed to do a nature-themed playground, and we would talk about that as well as an option. Those are very expensive as well, even more expensive than a typical playground. I think that's what the discussion that I remember is, at least.
Yeah.
And remind me, OSLAD is not for playgrounds, even if they're new amenities or nature playgrounds?
So I don't think you can do just a playground. You've got to do a playground in conjunction with other things. And it's got to be past its life expectancy or useful life for it to be eligible. This certainly fits that need, but so
I do know that we have had some great discussions about, taking advantage of the nature center, potentially our new property there, the nature preschool outdoor space, potentially eventually. And then if this could be, nature playground, which has been, advocated for from surveys and other, that could, if it could potentially fall into an OSLAD grant, opportunity.
Sure. Yeah, and those are all, and sometimes the timing of these is the real challenge because, this could be a potential OSLAD, Hinckley could be a potential OSLAD, and then you can't apply for more than one in a year. So, or maybe you can't get more than one in a year. You might be able to apply for more than one. I'd have to check on that. But yeah, I mean, those are all things that we would and could look into. But either way, we would still want to start and need to start the planning process so we could kind of vet some of those things out.
I think what Harmony might be saying is this is a different option for an OSLAD grant, but I think you already did all the prep work for Hinckley and it's all teed up to be ready to write the grant, right? And this one is not.
Yeah, I mean, we've done more work towards Hinckley, yeah, and we've already gotten to the point of where we're getting ready to go and we could do some community input things as we, move forward with that project. But
it's an interesting concept though, like changing where you would do the grant.
I think yeah, I don't think we'd be ready. I think this is definitely something we would look at a grant project for, but we don't even have the money for the development of that. It certainly can be shifted, right? If it's a priority by the board, but we don't currently have it in our budget till 2023. And part of that consideration was moving up the playground at Hinckley for the Hinckley playground for that grant. So, we could shift around, but I would say, and Terry or Jennifer can correct me if I'm wrong, there's no way if there were a grant cycle for this year, we wouldn't be in the position, even if this was approved by the board, to apply for this in this year's cycle because of all the work that would have to be done, the community meetings and the design, and just because there's a lot of factors that would be considered. It's not as easy as just replacing this typical playground because of all the things we just talked about, right? We would want to look at all, like doing possibly a nature playground, possibly an accessible playground, or possibly a traditional playground. So I think that at some point, if the OSLAD grants are available, it would be a good candidate, but not in 2021.
yeah, and if I recall correctly, we kind of looked at it like the Hinckley was a project that we would look at for a certain grant cycle, and then we would start the planning on this and get it ready so that if there was a grant, whether it was OSLAD or another grant available to apply for in 2022, this would be that area in that project, and then that we budgeted the construction money in 2023.
Correct, yes.
So. So moving on to Northeast Park. At Northeast Park, we're proposing to resurface these tennis courts and basketball court. The cracking here and heaving has started to become a little more extensive, as you can see in this photo. Not quite as bad as what we saw at JC, but again, this is something that we're looking to do to extend the useful life of this and not have a situation where we have a safety hazard that we've got to shut down these courts. We initially had planned to do JC in 2020, and then this would have been done in 2021 to kind of stagger some of the costs and give us some flexibility in future years. However, we think that with the increased use of the parks, the condition of this, and the size of this tennis court, along with the need for us to do the other resurfacing and painting to remove the pickleball court lines and things like that. This really makes sense to continue to do forward to do in 2021 at the same time that we're doing JC. So we would actually plan to bid these resurfacing projects together so that they would happen hopefully pretty early on, and then we would get an economy of, well, there's a scale of a couple larger areas here. So. Moving on to Oakton Park. So at Oakton Park, I want to start off by reminding the board and the community that we did apply for a park grant in early 2020, and we do hope to hear soon on the status of that grant. We don't know for sure when or if we will hear about those, but we are hopeful to hear soon. We did apply for a $2.5 million grant that would offset the cost of a $5.5 million project. This project would, give us the ability to renovate the interior spaces of the ice rink to make them function better for the patrons that use it. Initially, this was anticipated that this could help work with some of the other master planning projects that we were doing. But as we postponed that for now, this would be something that might have to stand alone, or we might have to pick up that conversation separately. So, when we get to the point of Restore Illinois Phase 5, hopefully, eventually, we do anticipate that we would then, bring back revisiting the master planning process with Oakton and the renovations that we had previously discussed, and we can bring that back up and evaluate where we're at as a district and a community and what our needs are. Have they changed or are the same? So obviously, like I mentioned, the award of this park grant may have some impact on that conversation and timing, but we'll have to wait and see when we hear. So we're requesting to replace the flat roof. This is just a portion of the building. It's over the mechanical systems. We did have several leaks already that we had to patch this year. We don't know the actual age of this roof, but we do believe that it's over 20 years old and certainly beyond its useful life. And it's leaking, so it's important for us to protect our assets inside. One of the primary things we want to talk about with this is we want to have a watertight building to protect our infrastructure, obviously, but well, okay, you just got done talking about a grant. What impact does this have? In the proposed grant project or in any other plan going forward, we would anticipate keeping this for some time, and so this wouldn't be ill-spent money. We would have this space still within our building envelope and something that we need to maintain watertight for many, many years to come, regardless. So we do think that this is appropriate replacement cost at this time. So at the driving range, we're looking to replace the Gator, which is a utility vehicle, and the ball picker for the range. These were purchased in 2012 and have typically a 7 to 10 year life expectancy. We're having intermittent mechanical problems with this particular utility vehicle. It's also it's got a broken seat. It's got issues. The windshield's cracked, and a couple of other panels and gauges and things in the dashboard panel that are missing. So it definitely is becoming a little bit of an issue out there for its intermittent reliability as far as the operations for that facility goes. This was originally budgeted to be replaced in 2019, but postponed because staff was trying to determine what the best piece of equipment, best ball picker was. It was pushed off to 2020, and then subsequently it was pushed off in 2020 due to COVID. So so this is something that's already been pushed off a few years, and staff really feel strongly about the need for replacing it. We do feel that the utility vehicle still has some potential value for us at another location. In fact, we're proposing that we would repurpose this to the main park property, and it would help, both maintenance and recreation staff in programming and maintenance needs in and around the pond and around the property over there. We would store it in the garage and have it available for the staff to use, where having an intermittent problem wouldn't usually create as much of an issue with, hey, we're not able to pick all the rainfalls. So, so that's just one way that we feel that we can maybe get a little more use out of this before it's completely dead. This is the piece of equipment that we're proposing to replace it with. It's a different model, different brand. It's made by Toro, and then we would also purchase this ball picker that we would want to replace so that it matches the hookups on this equipment. So, yes. Commissioner Libby.
Oh, I just wanted to say that given that the driving range ended up being, one of the surprise overperformers, I guess, in terms of our amenities and profitability, I think that it kind of makes sense to maintain it as in the best fashion and have equipment that helps meet the golfers' needs to the best of your abilities.
Yeah, thank you.
I assume that the new Toro will have a cage around it, not like in the picture, right?
Yeah, right. We stock picture from the internet. We couldn't find one with a cage on it. So, but yes,
I'm just saying it makes it a little more exciting. But no.
We'll just give them football helmets. They'll be fine.
Right, exactly.
No, I'm joking.
I thought the same thing.
So moving on to Prospect Park. We have already, begun the process of, planning for the repairs on the limestone portico. This is at the front entrance of Wohlers Hall at Prospect Park. We had initially had some money budgeted for, engineering, design, and then repair costs. And in the process, we have identified that that our repair costs are going to likely exceed what we have available in our budget. And so we are requesting some additional money. We do have, we have already incurred, we have an agreement for $15,000 for engineering costs. And we had to complete an engineering analysis, which cost us around $5,000. And we do anticipate the overall construction cost to be between $70,000 to $90,000. So with this additional request, we would have $89,600 available for the construction. So I think this is an appropriate range to budget for this. Obviously, we'd be hopeful that people are looking for work and we would get a good price on this for next year. But you can see in the picture here that the deterioration continues, and that if we don't take some efforts, then this column could fail. There's another picture of a spot right next to the door where, again, you can see where the cracking had started, and now the piece has fallen off of the wall. So the deterioration is advancing, and it's something that we really need to address. So moving on to Woodland Park. I just wanted to take this moment to remind everyone that we have our grant project that we'll be working on this year. The budget for this was allocated in 2020 and approved for the 2020 budget with the anticipation that we were going to begin and complete the construction this year. But the pandemic slowed down the state's approval period and their time frame for approving the agreements for the grant project, which pushed us back, and we are now getting ready to go out to bid this winter and anticipate breaking ground when the weather breaks in the spring, and we hope to be done in the fall of 2021.
Super exciting. I did have a question about the playground though, and usually I feel like during this meeting we talk about the playground replacement positioning. I know we've talked about Main Park, but this one's really old too. So do you have this on the list in the next few years as part of the replacement program, or not yet?
It is on the list. It's a little ways out, I believe, because we still have a handful of other playgrounds that are even older than this still. So I believe this is in 2026, perhaps. I think we have Main Park was up next, and then we have South Park and North Park are also older, and then Hinckley, and those are like our oldest playgrounds, and then I think it's Woodland. So yeah, we've definitely, there was a decent amount of deferral going with the replacement of the playgrounds, and now, you know, over the past several years, the cost of a playground replacement has gotten exponentially expensive because we have to comply with some of these things that didn't exist years ago, where we've got to make them accessible, which is great. We've got to provide stormwater detention and, you know, all the things that go with that. And so 10 years ago, when I got here, there would be maybe $60,000 in the budget for a playground replacement. And that just meant it was buying the equipment, staff was installing it, and that was fine. Now, when we budget for a playground, we're budgeting around $400,000 plus. So that has changed significantly, and it's really just so that we can keep up with these requirements that we have. So it's caused us to have to push some of them back a little bit, unfortunately.
Thanks, Terry.
Mm-hmm. So last but not least, we did have some money in the budget for property acquisition, and as the board approved earlier this evening, this was our newest acquisition for the Park District. So at this time, I would like to turn it over to Sandra, unless there's any other questions about anything in the capital plan for this year. I'd be happy to go back and answer any other questions or have further discussion.
You don't have to go back for me. But I would like to point out that that Commissioner Tunnell and myself have done everything in our power to minimize the wear and tear on the treadmills over the last several years.
Thank you for your efforts.
That's what we do.
It's a joint effort.
Each of us does our own part.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Superintendent Wolf. As promised, now we'd like to take a look at how we plan to pay for these investments to the district's assets, particularly considering the uncertainties that we're encountering due to the pandemic. So Terry gave a good overview of our capital process. And along with identifying the estimated cost and timing of replacing the district's assets with our capital asset replacement plan, we also project out funding sources. So this slide highlights these revenue assumptions. Our budget typically incorporates an operating surplus, which provides an annual pay-as-we-go funding source for our capital needs. But due to the financial uncertainty when the pandemic hit, we did not transfer operating funds to capital from 2019. And because we are projecting a deficit in 2020, we are not planning a transfer from operating to capital. And the 2021 budget, as Gail mentioned, it's basically a break-even-ish. We also don't anticipate a transfer. But transfers of $250,000 are projected to resume in 2022 and 2023, hopefully growing to $400,000 in 2024 and 2025. So the projections also do include estimated grant revenues for that Hinckley Park OSLAD grant. If those grants are not available or we are not successful, that project would be reevaluated and phased or phased in if the grant is not awarded. So we're also including receipt of the city's TIF commitment under the TIF agreement in 2021 and 2023. And it assumes that we begin to receive revenue from the Historical Society agreement in 2021 through 2026. And we do have an estimated affiliate contribution for the athletic field lighting project, which is really just an estimate at this point and may or may not be realized. And lastly, what we talked about at the beginning of our meeting, how Bob presented the debt refinancing opportunity. The revenue projections here assume that we would do that 2-year new money borrowing as part of the 21 budget. So it is included in the 21 budget in the capital fund, the proceeds at the amount using up that debt service extension-based capacity. So it incorporates the effect of those refundings. As well as a bond issuance in 2023, which coincides with the expected timing of replacement of the ice mechanicals at Oakton.
Sandra, can you remind me what the terms of the Historical Society agreement was? Because you said they were going to resume making payments. Is that what you said, or what word did you use?
I said that it assumes we begin to receive revenue from the agreement in 2021. We did, I think, extend out when their initial payments begin, which is supposed to begin in 2021. So get to that. I believe it was
initial payment. I didn't realize that's what we did, that the initial payments were extended out. Oh.
No, we've gotten funding from the Historical Society, but
okay.
The remaining balance, I believe, right? We'd have to look at that in detail, but yes, we've received something from them, but then there was in the agreement, the payments were still supposed to start after the initial payment last year, and they asked us to push it back. Right.
Yeah.
They bought a fire truck and they're fundraising for a fire truck.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why I pointed out, I believe it's 41,500 each year. Okay.
Are they asking to put the fire truck on our property? Does anyone know that?
I had a discussion with them about that, and we evaluated it and told them that we did not think that was feasible due to our storage issues and our space limitations.
So this slide shows the capital project fund projections out through 2025, and where we have other financing sources. It's 1, 2, 3 from the bottom of the sources. I believe that is where we're including the Historical Society commitment. You can also see how the projected fund balance does get rather low out in 24 and 25 before we would have additional bonding capacity when our existing debt is paid off in 2027. Or as Bob mentioned, we would have some flexibility if we needed to borrow sooner, but hopefully we would be able to kind of maximize things if we look at filling in as our existing maturities are paid off. So as we consider the many capital needs that we've identified, as well as those which may yet to be determined and how to prioritize them, one question to consider is how much should we be investing in our capital assets? So one way to think about it is, are we maintaining the value of our assets? And that's accomplished through regular maintenance in the operating fund, as well as the replacement schedule we've been talking about. And another way to think about it is, as our assets are depreciating, are we continuing to invest in capital? So this slide shows that in 2019, our annual depreciation expense was about 1.4 million. And since our debt limitation has been allowing us to generate approximately 800,000 in bond proceeds annually, you can see how we really need to identify additional funds in order to continue to at least invest as much as we are depreciating. But as the projections show, we've kind of shown how we can meet those needs at least over the next 5 years or so, and that capital asset replacement plan is more forward-looking than that even. So as we're thinking about how will we fund things going forward. So at this point, I would like to ask if anyone has questions about the proposed capital project fund budget. It's a lot to digest right now, so if not, I would like to turn it over to Human Resources Director DeGangi to present the compensation recommendation for full-time employees.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me okay?
All good, yep.
Great.
Can hear you
Yes.
fine.
Thank you. So Terry spoke to the budget recommendation related to capital projects, and now I'm going to shift gears to budget recommendations related to our human capital. Their value, their contribution, I can't summarize it in 1 or 2 words. It's tremendous, but simply stated, these are the folks, at least here's a snapshot of the folks, the full-time employees who make it all happen. I know you've had an opportunity to meet a lot of them, but there are a number of our full-time employees who don't have the opportunity to meet with you all, and many of them are behind the scenes. So I thought this was just a nice snapshot to start out with. You can go to the next slide. Thanks, Terry. So there's a couple components for your consideration. As in years past, I present to you a recommendation for an increase in base pay and a performance award plan. So I want to point out that I'm going to be speaking just regarding the full-time staff. And then I will hand it off to Sandra DeAngelis to speak to the part-time compensation, part-time staff compensation. So as in years past, we look to comparable data from the labor market. So how do we come up with a recommendation for salary increases? We look to a couple different sources. The one source we look to is data from other organizations, other employers outside of the Parks and Rec arena. We utilize professional resources. World at Work is the largest compensation organization. They give us data and recommendations and give us information from organizations they survey from the Chicagoland area. Now it's important to point out that World at Work is, although the largest organization in the United States, Newport Group is a spin-off of McGladrey. And McGladrey, this Newport Group, is the compensation consulting group that we actually use at the Park District for data as well. This year, Newport Group conducted their own survey of organizations. It's the first year they've done so. And then the third source is Management Association of Illinois. Those numbers have not come in yet. So these, the 3% from World at Work, Newport Group, the same 3%. They're surveying different companies. That is a base pay increase for 2021. That is the median of employers who were surveyed. And it was interesting because the surveys the organizations had to do them twice. They actually surveyed companies, employers before COVID hit. And once COVID happened, our worlds changed, employers' worlds changed. So these organizations, they actually resurveyed employers after COVID hit. So these results are post-COVID, in the midst of COVID. And it also includes some organizations that are reporting zero increases. There were some noteworthy observations when I got the results back from World at Work that I thought I would share with you. For 2021, the projections for the median increases, they're consistent with prior year at 3%. In 2020, this calendar year, about 10% of the companies said they were freezing salaries. And a lot of organizations, this was more anecdotally, not statistical, but they said that the timing of pay increases for a lot of companies, they were delaying them. And the last component, say variable pay, if employers do have a variable pay plan, award bonus, kind of similar maybe to our awards, which typically are very small compared to the private sector, organizations expected them to be less. So that was a source anecdotally and statistically from World at Work as to what other companies are doing. And you'll see in the next couple slides what our recommendations are similar. It's a hybrid. So we will be making similar recommendations and cuts, if you will. We also like to compare ourselves to other park districts. So when we make a recommendation for 2021, we like to see, well, what are other park districts doing? And they're in the same situation as we are. They're in the process of going through the budget process. These are estimates. Hoffman Estates, you'll see at the top at 2%. A couple districts are at 2.5%. And about 6 other park districts, their pool, they're estimating to be 3%. And this is a pool for merit. So the pool of money is allocated based on performance. You'll note that Skokie's on a fiscal year, it starts in May. They're the only park district who is on a fiscal year who have a projection, because it's a little bit too early for the others. So what are we recommending for our full-time employee? With regards to base pay, we are recommending 3% to continue with a performance-based merit pool. And the reason being to keep employees' wages competitive with the labor market, to reward employees based on merit, based on performance, but recognizing the economic condition and what we're faced with, to reduce the raises from a full year to a half a year. Something we have never done before. We think that the employees will understand it and respect it, but we can still at least invest in employees and they can still receive a decent or good merit increase based on performance. But from the district's perspective, from a budget perspective, to be conscientious of where we're at, the half a year would amount to $49,500. Versus last year, which was $108,000. Now, had we recommended a full year for 2021, it would have been $99,000. So we're recommending we cut it in half, make it effective July 1st. One item that is still pending is a wage reopener with the labor union, with SEIU. That is an expected item. Each year, the contract calls for a wage reopener. And so Terry and I are going to the table with SEIU. This year, aside from the wage reopener, though, we have a full contract that's expiring, and so we'll be approaching the table soon. I thought we should point out some of the decreases. One is headcount, which has been very significant. On the left-hand side of your screen, I capture the active, full, and part-time employees. Pre-COVID, I looked at January 1st when things were normal. We had 59 full-time employees. We had 594 part-time employees, a total of 653. And today, we're only at 51 employees. 265 part-time for a total of 316. We're down by 69%. I point out the full-time employees of the 8 that we are down. One of those 8 is a furloughed employee, where the other 7 are vacancies, permanent vacancies or turnover, if you will. And here's the vacancies. Those are the 8 that I just mentioned. They've been vacant during different periods of time throughout the year. I believe the operational budgets that will be coming up, they'll talk about those vacancies. Performance award plan recommendations. Each year we have asked for a $20,000 pool to award employees for some out of the ordinary, unusual, above and beyond, not in the job description milestones. This year we are not recommending any in 2021, and there's a cost savings of $20,000. There's some other related reductions that one of the commissioners had mentioned, and that's employee development. District-wide, we're looking at a reduction of about 61,000 or 58% for 2021. So if there's any questions, I'd be glad to address them with regards to the full-time recommendations. I'll turn it over to Superintendent DeAngelis to speak about the part-time increases in wages. Are there any questions?
Thank you,
This is
Director.
Commissioner Tunnell. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, sorry.
So taking away the $20,000, the incentive that's been there for several years, do you feel that takes away on morale? Like, I mean, we're looking at a $20,000 reduction, but is that insensitive to the climate? Just because we've had so many hardworking employees working with more of a workload and just doing a lot more than a given year. So I just wondered, like, would something be better than just eliminating that completely? I guess is just my thought process.
Yeah, it's a great point, and Gail may want to interject here, but we were looking for ways to save in every way possible to cut back, right? And we know that the merit increase, the 3% bucket, is the most important to employees. That would be a morale killer. The bucket, the $20,000 for the awards, if we could keep it, I would personally love to keep it. You know, I don't know that we can afford it. Gail, I'll turn it over to you with regards to that. We know that we are looking for places to make deep cuts, and like I said, the merit increase were the most important to us.
Right. Yes, we are certainly, you know, this is a tough one, and so are the, you know, the half-year salaries. But as Diane said, we've just looked across the board, you know, how to make this work. And so I think that we will, you know, I would say that it would be helpful, of course, right, to have something for them. So I think that's something, if the board wants to consider, we can certainly look at that. So
I just think appreciation goes a long way. Whether the money's there or not, just like, I hope that the employees know how appreciative the board is of their hard work during this challenging time, because it's been a very unique situation for a lot of people. So, and I would just hate for it to come across as like we're just insensitive to what's going on. And even if it was just a little bit of money, like, I would hope that we could find something to cut back on somewhere else. To me, I think the people element is what makes the district unique to me. And I would hope that we could find some way to reward them. And that's just my 2 cents. Thank you.
Thank you.
I had a quick question about the head count. I know that there, like you said, there's 8 positions, full-time positions that are currently open, with one of them being furloughed. Of the other 7, I mean, how many of those do you anticipate attempting to fill in 2021? I mean, obviously that's.
Yeah, those are being assessed, and there's a hybrid, and each of the operations are assessing those individually for their needs, and those are going to be covered at the upcoming budget meetings when the operations present to you. Some may be filled, some may not be filled, some may be partial year. I don't know, but those are going to be discussed more in detail with the operational presentations.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, does anyone else have any other questions? Or I will move on. Thank you, Director DeGangi.
Thank you.
So in addition to the compensation recommendations for full-time employees, I'm going to provide you with an overview of the part-time and seasonal compensation recommendations. We're going to review the merit increase proposal, minimum wage legislation, associated projected costs, and then we're going to look at the overall costs related to all of the proposed compensation recommendations within the 2021 proposed budget. So historically, the merit increase for part-time employees mirrors the full-time merit increase percentage. So the proposal for a 3% increase for currently employed part-time staff would also be implemented on July 1st of 2021. So this next slide has a chart that details the minimum wage rates required by Illinois law. The rate increases from $10 per hour to $11 on January 1st, 2021, and then it continues to increase $1 per hour each year thereafter through 2025. So we've estimated the cost for part-time and seasonal employees based on current positions, wages, and hours for and a 3% merit increase effective July 1st as approximately $23,500. Then the estimate to bring wage rates for positions that are currently below the new minimum wage up to $11 per hour is approximately $60,800. And this compares, I went back and looked at the estimate we put together last year, solely attributing the minimum wage from last year's analysis. So it's kind of taking the merit out of it, and that we estimated $74,450. So, you know, I would say last year's estimate was not too bad. And I think we, you know, are not quite budgeting for as many positions based on the expectation with the pandemic. So overall, the total estimated cost increase based on these two components is about $84,300.
Superintendent DeAngelis, is there a requirement to match the merit increases of part-time to full-time? Is that a requirement somewhere, or is that just traditionally how we've operated as a district?
That is traditionally how we've operated at the district. And, you know, we did have some discussion back and forth, and, you know, we felt that that this would, you know, be a good recommendation. And again, that merit increase is a pool like the, I don't want to say it, it's based again for part-time employees that are currently on the payroll.
Yes, Sandra, if I could add in, they have a matrix as well, part-time staff, and it's based on performance. So it's similar to
Right.
full-time.
That's a better way of explaining it. Thank you, Director DeGangi. Okay, so this chart shows the overall changes in salaries and wages, including the impacts of headcount and furlough reductions, as well as the proposed merit increases. So I just wanted to show and highlight how prior to the pandemic, total salaries and wages in the 2020 budget were 8.2% higher than 2019 actual expenses. So typically, we have a similar level of staff and our costs grow, or we budget for increased program activities and the costs grow. So that's typically what the budget looks like. But as a result of the changes made during 2020 to address the impact of the pandemic, 2020 year-end estimates for total salaries and wages are now 23.7% less than 29 actual and 32.8% less than what we had budgeted for in 2020. So further demonstrating how we've adjusted due to the pandemic, total salaries and wages in the 2021 budget are almost 12% below what was originally budgeted in 2020. Does anyone have any questions regarding the employee compensation recommendations for the 2020 budget? And thank you for your questions as we've moved along. Okay, I'm going to plow ahead. Stop me if you do have a question. But lastly, I would like to review the 2020 tax levy recommendation for taxes collected in 2021, as well as the related assumptions that have been incorporated into the proposed 2021 budget. So we have included an assumption for new property growth of just under 50,000. We have assumed that we will not include the inflationary increase to our tax levy, which is allowed by the property tax limitation law. While typically we recommend capturing this additional revenue to help offset increasing expenses and maintain our capital investments, we feel that due to the budget reductions we're proposing, along with the impact of the current economic environment on our community members and homeowners, that we are not recommending it is incorporated into the 2020 tax levy. So there is an increase here of about $32,000 in annual debt service due to the structure of the bonds. And while the new property assumption is really neutral to the taxpayer, the total dollar value of these changes is about 1% over the prior year's levy. So I also wanted to point out that typically we budget property taxes at 100% of the tax levy. And that is because we also have a factor of an additional 2% applied to the levy for collection losses. So while it doesn't affect the amount we are recommending to the levy, I did want to point out that because of the uncertainty regarding the economic environment in 2021, the budget also assumes a 2% reduction to property tax receipts. So the amount of that tax levy that we're including in the budget before we add the 2% for loss and costs has been reduced by 2%. So we're looking, trying to be conservative in case we don't realize some of those revenues. And lastly, although we're not including the consumer price index increase in our tax levy recommendation, I do want to provide you with a reference that the rate was 2.3% last year, which would have resulted in about $126,000 of additional revenue. So this chart highlights how we've arrived at the new property assumption. Sorry, Commissioner Grau, did you have a question?
Are we going to talk about that decision or not?
Sure.
Not to take the CPI?
Yeah, sure.
I just want to say, if we're going to give 3% raises and we're raising, I looked through the, other material you sent, and we're raising rates on all our classes. This is the only place where we're taking in consideration that the economic environment is difficult. And I think our tax capture rate is like 98%. So I'm kind of surprised about that decision.
I'm happy to discuss it if the board is interested in capturing that revenue. We can certainly make that adjustment.
Sandra, you need to know this for the next meeting, right? I mean, we welcome a conversation now. If people want to, if they want to think about it, it's the next meeting. We can also have discussion, and that's when we need the approval, correct?
Well, we would want to, adopt the Truth in Taxation resolution, which would incorporate that if we wanted to capture it. So if we want to have the conversation now, I think it's, it's as good a time. It's probably better to have it now. I mean, we can certainly amend the resolution if it's decided we want to add it, but I welcome the discussion.
Okay. Looks like Commissioner Harrington is ready to say something.
Like, you can kind of zoom on. It's almost like a game show. You kind of click
it
on
is.
and go. So I had a question about, we talk about a high tax capture rate, and we've talked about this year not seeing a significant difference in the amount of receipts from our tax collection, but knowing that there are economic factors at play, and a lot of folks are looking to this next surge or cycle for continuing potential hardships. What are we, I may have missed this, I'm sorry, it's getting later. What are we estimating our tax capture rate for the next installment payment?
Okay, so if I understand your question right, so and I was, it's coming up in the next slide, but that's okay.
Okay.
So,
I mean, are we assuming that we're going to still have this great capture rate in our budget that we've had thus far? I mean, I think many economists may say that there's going to be a potential decline in the amount of receivables from the tax perspective, given additional hardship.
So the board's thanks, Terry. The board's adopted this a policy to review the district's tax levy collection percentage and adjust this loss and cost resolution that's on file with the county annually. So I've included the data here, and as you point out, this shows that, and this is a year lag, right? This is from our 2019 audited financials, that the collection percentage has remained at 98%. And to date, we've collected about the same amount as we percentage-wise as we collected in 2019 through October. So that's good news, and I feel confident that our 2020 collections will be on track. But as you point out, right, so my recommendation here, because of our annual policy to look at this loss cost percentage, we don't really have evidence at this point to justify adding a higher loss cost factor to that resolution to make that change. So I'm recommending that we keep that in place. However, because of exactly the factors you've cited within the budget document, I'm assuming that we're collecting 98% of the levy amount before we've added that loss cost percentage instead of the 100% we usually budget. So
Okay.
I've reduced that amount by 2%.
2%. Okay, thank you. That was my question, so I appreciate
Yeah,
it.
is that clear?
It does, yeah, thanks.
Okay, so, but I think Commissioner Grau wants to talk about, you know, it's, we could certainly use more revenue. You know, would we consider including that consumer price index capture? And you know, as I commented, that's, you know, typically what we recommend. But it's you know, it's tough to, because of all those factors. So I'm interested in input from the rest of the board for sure.
Well, you know.
Commissioner Leach.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. By the way, excellent presentation. I know I've been quiet and haven't asked a lot of questions, but you guys did a phenomenal job. I love all the pictures, all the details, especially the pictures of the people. So I love how you've incorporated all these things in with technology. So thank you. On the tax levy, I'm going to be consistent, and I appreciate also the fact that you have put it in at 0. I do think I think what you're just getting ready to allude to the factors due to the things the state's already dealing with, other aspects. I love what we're able to do, and I think we stretch $1 very well. And I would also go to Commissioner Tunnell's point. If we're going to use money, and push it on the boundaries of helping support our employees, I'm always consistent with that. And I absolutely agree, at least a 3% pool. But when I come to the tax levy, I do think at this point, you know, a 0% is fine given everything else that's going on in the world today. So that's my feedback. I'm not really you probably not needed to debate with me, but I'll be curious to hear the other commissioners' points. But again, I just want to thank the staff again for all this hard work. It's been a great presentation, and I also appreciate seeing the numbers at a 0 base, at least at this point in the presentation and process. Thank you.
I appreciated seeing the full-time staff photos as well. I wanted to say thank you to Diane. That was wonderful reminder of the hard work of the folks over this past year and beyond. With regards to the CPI discussion and increasing taxes on residents of Park Ridge and of our district right now, for all of the reasons that I previously mentioned and considerations and concerns I have, knowing that job loss, pay cuts, furlough, other hardships are health hardships and other are really impactful even on our community right now. I would not be in favor of raising the CPI.
I'm usually the only one who advocates for it, so I think the silence in the room is you know, that's the answer. We haven't gone through what we're going to go through in December about the cuts, such as it looks like no 4th of July fireworks, etc. So, you know, we're deciding this based on what we're looking at tonight, and not everything else. So I just wanted to be noted. I'm sorry. Oops. Yeah.
President Coyne, were you gonna?
I was just going to, well, I think I think Commissioner Grau just sort of hit the nail on the head, so I don't have to comment any further. But I do appreciate the fact that you worked this out without that CPI increase in it, and I would, because of the times we're in, I'm not inclined to suddenly to do that and increase the burden on the taxpayer any further than they already are. So so I don't have to say anything more because it was already been said.
Okay, thank you. I think Commissioner Grau does raise the important point that there are significant cuts. We've talked about the compensation recommendation is only for 6 months when typically it's for a year. The cuts to employee development. There's other highlights in the budget message of other things that we've cut, including the special events that she mentioned, as well as, not anticipating that we would be able to do a transfer to capital. So those are all factors, but these are unprecedented times. And, we went roundabout and internally, among staff talked about how to approach this, and really felt that particularly because of, all the hardships mentioned, that this is how we're going to propose the budget. But I do appreciate the feedback because there's many ways to look at this.
I just wanted to add one thing quick, and then I'm sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell, I know you haven't spoken on this topic yet, but we just got done discussing some fantastic maintenance projects that are much needed, new amenities that we're thinking about bringing to our district amidst pandemic and hardship time, and some other projects that have been passion projects of many on the board, worked into a budget where we don't have to raise taxes on folks during this time. So I just wanted to take a moment to kind of appreciate the fact that this district is still amazingly delivering through the hard work of the staff, through really prudent financial work that's been done, and still being able to put forth new amenities, which is pretty incredible. So sorry, Commissioner O'Donnell, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have too much more to add. I think what's been said already, I'm in agreement with in terms of staff and the pictures and everything. But I would just add one other little piece to it that, and actually, Commissioner Harrington, what you just said is part of this, that we're doing all these things. I feel like we're just as a district serving so well, and the work is so hard because the situation changes by the day, and the direction that they have to deal with from the government changes by the day. And yet they've worked hard, and they put together a presentation that says, you know what, we're not going to increase the burden on the taxpayers of this community, which is so unlike some of the other governmental bodies that we're surrounded with. And I am just so grateful to Executive Director Mountcastle and her staff for taking that approach. Thank you, and I support what you've done.
I wanted to also thank you all for your wonderful comments. It's a team effort. The one thing I will point out, it's not a lot, but we do have a balance. The goal was a break-even operating budget, and we are showing about 70,000, 76,000. So we do have a little leeway if there's something, if we feel strongly at the end of, we don't have to decide that now, but after you hear the December presentation, at the second meeting in December, that's where we'll need to know, the changes in the operating budget, because we do have, we have some leeway if we want to still come in with a break-even budget, or we save it for, the unknown, which we certainly will have. It's a budget, and we're basing it on, a lot of unknowns this year, right? So that's all. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Executive Director Mountcastle. Yeah, so I won't go back. I think we've seen before. I won't get into the details because it's getting late about how I estimated new property growth that may or, you know, it's slightly lower than what we've been using by a few $1 million in EAV. Otherwise, I just always we want to look at where the district is compared to similar park districts as it relates to tax levy. This chart shows our tax levy as a percentage of the overall tax bill for a Park Ridge resident compared to other similar districts, and you can see that we are in line or lower than many of them. And lastly, we have another similar chart that shows the line here shows the total EAV for those other districts.
Could you go?
Could you repeat the question?
Could you go back to that previous slide just real quick?
Sure.
So, is there a reason why you show it that way rather than as a percentage of NAV? Because wouldn't this, some of these could be not so comparable depending on their school districts and all of that, or am I not understanding it properly?
So that's why we look at it a couple different ways. So the next chart here shows the line shows EAV, and then the bars are showing the total tax levy amount. So it's not, I mean, the tax rate itself is a percentage of EAV.
Right.
So I mean, I think we've had it before where I've showed the tax rate as well as the percentage, and it gets a little confusing in one chart. So I split it up this way this time, you know, so you can see how our total levy compares to the other districts and where those districts EAV, total EAV lines up. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I could get, you know, I could add that back in and
maybe just put it in a
follow up.
Yeah, it is confusing when you combine it in one chart, so maybe just have one more chart.
That just shows the tax rates? Sure.
Yeah.
I mean, the bar is actually, if we, I'm sorry, Terry, could you go back again? So the bar itself, yeah, that's a percent. No, that is the percentage. So yeah, I'll follow up with, you know, the actual tax rates.
It's not a big deal. I just, yeah.
Sure. It's not a big, you know, it's a similar kind of effect, really.
Yeah.
But here again is total levy, you know, we're in line or lower than most of them. You know, Niles is a little bit different because of the way their district is, you know, with so much of industry. But this shows the EAV as well. So that was the last kind of part related to the tax levy. I do want to just remind you of how we set up the timeline there. That again, we'll be bringing the Truth in Taxation resolution at the next board meeting. The first meeting in December will be the operating fund presentation. And then if there are any changes that the board would like us to make as far as what we've covered today or at the, you know, anything related to the budget, really, we would want to hear that by the second meeting in December, because that is when we would want the board to adopt the budget and appropriation ordinance in tentative form.
Sandra, would you want it before that meeting, probably so we can incorporate that?
Well, ideally,
Yeah,
I think what we did last year, because there was a little bit of compression in the timeline, is that, I went ahead and prepared, if there's capital that we want to, make change. I mean, anywhere along the line, we can work it out. It's always better to have the input sooner rather than later, but I think we prepared the ordinance based on the proposed budget. And then there were some changes that we made at the meeting, and we adopted the resolution as amended.
Perfect. Okay.
So I was
So that meeting is
imagining
fine.
that we could hopefully, unless it's, these fees here and those fees there, then that's going to be a little trickier, but.
Okay. So that meeting, we would want the final input. I think the other point is obviously we welcome any questions. I've got things written down that we're going to follow up on, and that, anytime, reach out to any of the superintendents or Human Resources Director DeGangi or myself on any of the questions, that come up on the budget. So I think with that, thank you, Sandra, Terry, Diane. And I think we're to new business.
Correct, unless Commissioner Harrington has any other items on her docket.
I think we have slogged through the first installment of the budget, but I wanted to echo thanks to Terry and Jennifer Meunier and Diane and Sandra and Gail and everyone else involved. Again, really impressive compilation amidst delivering services during a pandemic. So thank you.
Amen.
My pleasure. Thank you for your
Thank
kind
you.
words.
So are you turning the floor back to me, Commissioner Harrington?
My audio's all messed up. Have at it, President Coyne. It's all you.
Yeah, great. Okay, thanks. I have one item of new business. It's the same item I've had for the last several weeks. Is to thank several meetings. Is to thank the Park District staff for all of their tremendous hard work, and particularly shows in the budget. I know I'm repeating myself, but I definitely want it on the record that I couldn't be more impressed with the way that you guys have handled it. And I didn't know the exact extent of the staff reductions while you were doing it until I saw it right here. So really makes it even more impressive. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Any other new business?
I do not have anything.
In that case, I move to adjourn the meeting of the Board of Park Commissioners. Do I have a second?
Second.
Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Grau? Commissioner
That's a
Grau?
yes.
I thought you could go.
It's non-verbal yes.
Yes, it's a yes. Usually second
Commissioner
on the
Harrington?
second vote.
Yes.
Leduc?
Yes.
Commissioner Leach?
Yes.
O'Donnell?
Yes.
Commissioner Tunnell?
No.
Commissioner Coyne?
Aye.
Thank you.
Motion carried. Thank you
Thank
all.
you, Commissioner Tunnell, for the business. That would be fine with me, but okay.
He can hang around for a while, you know?
Thank